Hey, welcome back. Come in. Lie down wherever you're most comfortable tonight, and let the weight of the day finally leave your shoulders. Take one slow breath, a real one, the kind that fills your chest all the way, and then releases all the way slowly with nothing held back. Let your hands open, let your jaw unclench. Let the ceiling above you or the dark behind your eyes become the only thing your attention has to rest against right now. Tonight we're going back to Hallownest. We're going to spend a long, quiet time in that kingdom, that vast, impossible underground civilization built by a pale king who shed his original form to become something that could hold an empire together, who gave consciousness to creatures who had previously known only instinct, who lit the dark with soul and ambition and love and all the terrible costs that love at that scale eventually produces. Hallownest fell. You know it fell. But before it fell it was extraordinary, and even in its falling it remained extraordinary. And the creatures who lived and died and were transformed within its boundaries each carried stories worth remembering. Tonight, we're going to remember them, every significant being the knight encountered on their journey through the ruined kingdom. We're going to move from the earliest corridors, the forgotten crossroads, still infected and dim and strange, all the way down through the depths, through the city, through the gardens and the waterways and the deepest basin, and eventually all the way to the confrontation that waited at the centre of everything. We're going to give each of these beings their story, their full story, as best as the kingdom's scattered records allow us to recover it. We are going to treat each of them not as enemies or obstacles, but as what they actually were. People in a kingdom that was ending, doing what they could with what they had left. So settle in. Find your position and let your body sink into it. There is no urgency tonight. The story moves at whatever pace suits the late hour and the need for rest. The words will keep coming. If you drift before the end, good. That is the intention. That is the whole point of this. Before we begin, if these quiet lore stories help you find sleep on the nights it seems unwilling to come on its own, please consider leaving a like and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from tonight. The geography of this audience is genuinely beautiful. So many different rooms, so many different cities, so many different versions of the night, all receiving the same words at the same time. You're not alone in this. Now, gently, let's go into Hallownest, the forgotten crossroads. The very first place you set foot in a kingdom, to the knight arriving from the abyss, is entirely unknown, and yet somehow, somewhere below conscious identification, familiar. The crossroads are suffering when you arrive. The infection has moved through them comprehensively, and most of what you encounter there carries the orange light in its eyes, and the absence of intention in its movement. Once this was a transit hub of sorts, a network of passages connecting different parts of Hallownest, used by creatures of many species moving between the places they needed to be. It was busy once, probably. It had a rhythm. Now the rhythm has been replaced by something more uniform, more bleak, and the creatures moving through it no longer choose their paths. You move through. You find your footing. You encounter the kingdom in its damaged state and begin learning its language, and at a certain point you enter a chamber large enough to matter, and something very, very large begins moving toward you. Grus Mother. She is enormous. The first thing you process about her is simply scale. She fills the corridor in a way that makes instinctive retreat feel like the reasonable response. She moves with the slow deliberateness of something that has always had the right of way everywhere it has ever moved, Not through aggression, but through simple physical reality. When something this large is moving in your direction, the smaller thing adjusts. She has always known this about the world. She has always moved through it on these terms. She's called the Grus Mother, and the most important fact about her, the fact underneath which every other fact about her situation should be understood, is that she is exactly what her name says. She is a mother. She has grubs. In the region of her vast and ancient body, carried and protected with all the instinctive devotion that biology has spent an enormous amount of time developing in large creatures who reproduce in small numbers and depend on the survival of each offspring. There are small lives. They are hers. They are her responsibility and her purpose and the organizing principle of her existence at this point in her life. She is not guarding territory. She is not expressing dominance. She is not participating in any of the political or ideological conflicts that define so much of what is happening in Hallownest. She is being between danger and her young, which is the simplest and most ancient of the behaviours that consciousness eventually produces in creatures capable of it, and in creatures below the threshold of the consciousness the Pale King gave. This behaviour sometimes runs even deeper, written into the body at a level that the mind can only partially access even when the mind is working correctly. The Grus as a species lived in the crossroads long before the infection, and will live there in whatever form survival allows long after it. They are large and slow and primarily occupied with the rhythms of their own biology. They feed, they rest. They move through available spaces with a patience that is not philosophically achieved but simply natural. The patience of beings for whom hurrying has never been relevant, for whom the pace of the body is the pace of life and no apology is owed for either. The forgotten crossroads, when the infection swept through it, changed completely for the creatures who had made it home. The orange light that carries the Radiance's disturbing presence moved through the air, through the water, through the spaces between shells and the seams in carapaces where foreign material can find its way inside. The minds of simple creatures were the most quickly affected. The less complex the consciousness, the less there was to resist the intrusion, the faster the infection's particular kind of will replaced the creature's own. The Grus Mother's mind, large as she is in body, was probably not complex enough to offer much resistance. It would not have taken long. The orange fills the eyes, the choice evaporates. What remains is the behaviour, the pattern, the thing the body was doing before the infection arrived, continuing now because the infrastructure of the behaviour remains, even if the consciousness behind it has been replaced. What remained in the Grus Mother was the protection, the most basic thing. The thing that doesn't require thinking because it has been practiced so many times over so many generations of Grus that it runs in the substrate of the body, below the level where the infection could easily reach. She is still between her grubs and the world. She's still moving toward the thing that comes into her space. She's still doing the thing she was doing before the light came and took everything else. When she falls, when the night's blows finally bring down that enormous body, and the physical reality of the encounter concludes, the grubs scatter. They move away from her body in small, desperate flights, and there is in that moment a quality that the game does not highlight with music or cutscene, but that is present for anyone paying attention. She was still succeeding, in the most fundamental sense, right up until the end. The grubs were still alive. The protection was still working. Whatever the infection took from her, it could not take the one thing that was written deepest. She deserved better than the end Hallownest gave her. But she held the line. All the way to the end the instinct held. Let your breathing slow. This is only the beginning of the night's journey. There are many, many more to remember. Rest into the cadence of it. The Brooding Molek. There are things in Hallownest that are suffering alone. Not simply corrupted, not simply moved through by the infection the way a flock of birds is moved through by a wave. Their individual trajectories temporarily altered by a force passing through them, but genuinely, specifically, isolatedly suffering. Creatures who were caught by the infection not in the presence of others of their kind, not in the midst of ordinary life that the orange light then interrupted, but alone, in chambers that had no regular traffic, in places that other creatures had no particular reason to visit. These creatures did not lose themselves to the infection in the company of anyone. They changed alone. They endure whatever the infection produced in them alone. And there is a specific quality to suffering in complete isolation that is different from the suffering that happens in the presence of others, even if the others cannot help. The Brooding Molek is in a hidden chamber beneath the forgotten crossroads. Not a main corridor, not on any route that regular traffic would use, a sealed-off space, accessible only by breaking through a wall that presents itself as solid and permanent. The creature has been behind this wall for long enough that the chamber has developed the particular quality of a space that has contained something for a very long time without reprieve. The air is different. The texture of the waiting is different. Whatever was happening here has been happening for long enough that it has become the nature of the place. The Molek species, large jaw-dominated organisms adapted to the deep underground, predators in the oldest sense of the word, built around the mechanism of the enormous mouth that is also their primary tool of locomotion and their primary means of defence, lived in Hallownest's depths before the kingdom's civilization made the depths into something more organised. They were already old when the Pale King arrived. They were already adapted to a world where the darkness was not a temporary condition to be remedied by the application of soul light, but a permanent and accurate description of reality. They knew the dark. They had been the dark in a sense. The darkness that moves through the dark. The predator that the smaller creatures of those depths had to account for and sometimes didn't. The infection, when it reached the Molek in that sealed chamber, did something that it does to many large and instinct-driven creatures. It took what was already there and amplified it past the point of sustainability. The aggression, the alertness, the drive to respond to intrusion, all of it turned past its functional limit into something that runs continuously, that does not cycle down the way natural drives cycle down when they have been satisfied. That is simply on, always on, burning through the creature's physiology at a rate that cannot be maintained without consequence. The Brooding Molek in its chamber is that amplification sustained over time. It has been in pain, probably, in the way that permanent overstimulation produces something that functions as pain. It has been alone with that pain. Nothing has entered the chamber. Nothing has provided a target for the drive that has been running. Nowhere to put the energy of something that is always ready to respond and never gets to respond. And then the night breaks through the wall, and for the first time in however long something is here, something is present. Something has entered the space. The response is everything that has been building released at once. Total. Immediate. Without calculation or restraint, because the infection does not produce calculation or restraint. It produces the drive at full volume, and there has been a great deal of time for volume to accumulate. Fighting the Brooding Molek is, in a sense, absorbing the consequences of its solitude. You are the first thing to enter this space in a very long time, and you receive everything that space has produced. There is something almost compassionate about ending it. not in a comfortable or sentimental sense. The fight is genuinely difficult. The danger is genuine. But in the specific sense of bringing a conclusion to something that has been without conclusion for too long. When it is over, the chamber goes quiet. Another creature released from what was being done to it. Another piece of Hallownest's pain concluded. The False Knight and the story of Hegol. Now we arrive at one of the most layered stories in Hallownest's upper reaches. A story that begins as an encounter that looks simple and unfolds across the game's full depth into something with real pathos at its centre. The creature you fight in the Forgotten Crossroads, the one inside the enormous armoured shell, swinging a massive mace with shocking force, moving through the arena with the desperation of something that has made a decision and cannot be allowed to fail. What is not what it appears. The armour is real. The armour is ancient and extraordinary, proper to one of the highest figures in Hallownest's hierarchy. But the creature wearing it has no rightful claim to it. What is wearing Hegol's shell is a maggot. Hegol was one of the 5 great knights of Hallownest. This designation was not honorific. The 5 great knights were the elite defenders of the kingdom itself, the warriors the Pale King trusted above all others to protect what mattered most, the beings whose individual capability and personal loyalty made them the sharp personal instrument of the kingdom's defence. Ogrim, Hegol, Isma, Zima, Drya. 5 beings elevated to a role that was something close to the sacred in Hallownest's particular cosmology of power. To be one of the 5 was to be known and needed at the highest level. It was a form of belonging that almost nothing else in the kingdom could match. Hegol was known, among the considerable number of things he was known for as a warrior of exceptional ability. For one personal habit that those who knew him probably found endearing, he slept inside his shell. Not next to it, not near it, inside it. The shell that was his armour was also, in his custom, his sleeping place. He curled inside it when he rested, sealed himself in the way something both protective and private, and spent the hours when he was not actively needed as a knight in that enclosed and dark and personal space. A maggot found this. Found the shell, found it occupied or abandoned. There are details here that the years have obscured, that the kingdom's collapse has made permanently unclear, and made a decision that was either bold or desperate, or some quality that partakes of both in roughly equal measure. The maggot climbed in, took the shell for itself, and stood up inside the armour of one of the 5 great knights of Hallownest, and became, in the specific way that the physical fact of a thing creates reality, what the armour implied. Something enormous, something armoured, something that smaller creatures would not easily challenge. The motive was not power in the abstract. The motive, as best the evidence of the game's lore suggests, was protection of other maggots. In the Forgotten Crossroads, abandoned and infection-swept and stripped of the civilization that had given it its previous character, there were vulnerable creatures who needed someone to stand between them and the things that threatened them. The maggot in Hegol's shell appointed itself to that role, used the physical authority conferred by the armour to gather food, to hold space, to be the thing that predators hesitated before because predators are not always confident in their calculations, and something enormous and armoured with an enormous mace gives even confident predators reason to recalculate. This is not villainy. It is barely deception in the morally evaluative sense. The maggot did not steal the armour to defraud anyone of anything for personal enrichment. It found an enormous shell and understood, with the practical and unglamorous intelligence of small creatures, who survived through adaptability, that wearing it made possible something that being itself did not make possible, and what it wanted to make possible was the survival of others like it. The infected part, the aggression, the relentlessness of the fight, comes from what happened to the maggot inside the armour after it found itself in the forgotten crossroads as the corruption spread. The infection that took the crossroads took the maggot wearing Hegol's shell, and the infection pressed through the armour and found the small creature inside and did what it does: amplified, drove, removed the space between impulse and action in which considered behaviour lives. What had been a creature making calculated decisions to protect others became a creature in the grip of something that used the shape of that protective drive and ran it at a constant non-negotiating pitch. When you fight the false knight, you are fighting the infected version of something that was, before the infection, probably closer to heroic than its appearance suggests. The desperation in the movement, the ferocity, these qualities, in their pre-infection form, were probably what made the maggot willing to put on an armour it had no business wearing and stand in a corridor and be something capable of protecting others. The raw material of its character was not bad. The infection simply took that raw material and removed everything that mediated it. After the fight, the armour falls. You see the maggot inside. Whatever triumph or relief the fight's conclusion offers is complicated by this image. The small thing in the big shell, the actual creature that was behind all of that. And in the deeper regions of the crossroads, if you know where to look, you can find what became of Hegol himself. The 5 great knights did not all survive the end days of Hallownest. Hegol was among those who did not. His shell persisted after him, as shells do, and in the absence of its original occupant, it passed to someone else, and something almost like succession occurred, ugly and unacknowledged but genuinely motivated by protection. The failed champion, the dreamer boss, the encounter that occurs when you press the dream nail to the false knight's fallen shell, enters this story from a different direction. The dream residue that remains in the armour after the fight carry a kind of memory, the memory of the armour's original occupant, or the memory of the fight as it could have been at full strength, or something that vibrates between these interpretations without fully settling into either. The failed champion is fiercer, faster, more relentless than the false knight. It carries the heat of something that never had the chance to spend itself fully, that was cut short by circumstances before its natural conclusion. It is the dream of a warrior who never got to complete something important. The intensity of that incompletion burns through the encounter in a way that feels different from simple difficulty. The armour dreaming of its original knight, the maggot who wore it trying to be something larger than itself for reasons that were genuinely good. The knight whose shell was taken, whose end came before his proper end. 3 overlapping stories contained in one piece of enormous battered metal, accessible at different depths depending on how hard you look. Let your breathing be gentle. This is Hallownest, the place where, if you look closely enough at anything, you find layers. You always find layers. The massive moss charger. Not every story in Hallownest requires excavation to find its meaning. Some stories are simple and their simplicity is not a deficiency. The massive moss charger, the large infected guardian of Greenpath, has a story that fits in a small space and is complete in that space, and asks nothing more of you than to acknowledge it briefly as you pass through. Greenpath is the most visually alive region of Hallownest, the most obviously, demonstrably growing place in a kingdom that is otherwise characterised by stone and dark, and the amber light of corruption. Leaves here are real leaves. Moss is real moss. The light that comes through the upper reaches of Greenpath has a quality of green filtered diffusion that resembles, in its small way, the quality of light through a forest canopy, and the creatures that evolved here evolved in response to that specific greenness, to the particular humidity and texture of a space that supports genuine organic growth. Greenpath is not beautiful because anyone designed it to be beautiful. It is beautiful because life, given adequate conditions, tends toward beauty as one of its outputs. Into this green world the infection came, and what the infection does to creatures who had simple, functional lives is what it has always done. It removes the complexity and keeps the structure. The moss chargers, grazing adjacent creatures who move through Greenpath's tunnels in herds or near herds, their mossy exteriors making them almost continuous with the environment they inhabit, became something that retained the charge response but lost everything around it. The charge response was always the prominent feature of a moss charger's defensive behaviour. Fast, direct, the sudden explosion of speed that a large creature can produce when something has triggered the specific neural pathway that says danger close, move fast, impact. The massive moss charger does this, repeatedly, without variation, without the ordinary intercalation of other behaviours that a healthy creature would show: the grazing, the resting, the modest attention to territory that is not under immediate threat, just charge, the compression of a creature's full behavioural repertoire into its single most physically dramatic behaviour, repeated until the encounter ends. There is something honest in the encounter. This is exactly what the infection does. It does not make things more complicated, it makes them simpler, down to the single frequency, and runs that frequency until contact with something external creates a resolution. Greenpath continues after. The moss grows regardless. The pale creatures of that green space continue their particular existence in the filtered light. The massive moss charger returns to the ground it came from, and the path opens. Hornet. First encounter. Partway through the night's early traversal of Hallownest, after the crossroads and Greenpath and the first dim understanding of what this kingdom was and what has happened to it, a figure appears. She is positioned deliberately, standing on a stone bridge over a chasm, in a posture that says clearly that she is here on purpose, that she's been waiting, that she arrived before you and chose the ground, and knows exactly what the next several minutes will contain. She's small and precise and dressed in red, and she holds a needle, a weapon so slender it should almost disappear at this scale, but does not disappear at all, because whoever holds it with an understanding so complete that the needle carries the weight of everything its wielder knows about how to use it. She is Hornet, and her full story, origins, parentage, the long complex arc that eventually carries her to Farloom in Silksong, has been explored in other videos at great length, but here, in Hollow Knight, meeting her for the first time, the story you need to understand is the story of why she is on this bridge and what she is doing there, and what the encounter means to her as much as it means to the knight. Hornet is the product of a bargain. Her mother, Hera the Beast, was the ruling queen of Deepnest, a weaver, an arachnid warrior of the tribe that had migrated from ancient Farloom to the darkness of the underground, and built something fierce and independent and sovereign in the deepest tunnels. Hera was approached by the Pale King, who needed 3 dreamers, 3 higher beings who would enter eternal sleep to maintain the seal on the Hollow Knight's prison. Hera agreed, but she agreed on terms. She was a queen, not a subject, and she negotiated, in exchange for becoming a dreamer, for giving up every morning she would otherwise have had, She wanted a child. The Pale King agreed. Hornet was born, and Hera became a dreamer almost simultaneously. Her mother was there but unreachable, sleeping in Deepnest, maintaining the seal, present in the most insufficient way that presence can be present, as knowledge of location without possibility of contact. You cannot have a conversation with someone in eternal sleep. You can only know they exist and understand why the existing is configured as it is. Hornet grew up among the weavers of Deepnest, learning their silk and their needlework and the particular martial tradition of people who fight with threads and sharp points, and an understanding of three-dimensional space that comes from living in tunnels too complex to navigate by sight alone. She had access to the White Lady, the Pale King's queen, who acknowledged Hornet's existence and her claim on what care could be offered across the complication of that relationship. She was not placed in the formal succession. She was not given the honorifics that her parentage might have suggested. She was a private fact in a kingdom that preferred its facts formal, and she built herself in the space that ambiguity provided. What she built was the Princess Protector, a role she defined herself, through her own capability and her own choice. Not queen, because a crown is a category and categories constrain, and she had not yet finished discovering what she required of herself and was not ready to subordinate that discovery to institutional requirements. But protector, meaning someone who moves, who remains present at the crucial moments, who watches over what matters not because anyone gave them the assignment, but because they looked at the situation and couldn't look away. In Hallownest ruin, she watches. She maintains the vigil that no one required of her. She witnesses the slow dissolution of her father's kingdom with the specific grief of someone who understands both why it fell and why it mattered that it existed. She is not comfortable. She is not resigned. She is present in the way that all genuine guardians are present, not because they are certain the presence will be enough, but because absence is the only thing they are less able to tolerate than the difficulty of staying. She's on the bridge because she's been watching the night since before the night was aware of being watched. She knows what the night is, void-made, vessel-shaped, a sibling of the hollow night in the specific horrifying sense that they were made in the same way and for the same project, and the night is the one that ended up outside the black egg rather than inside it. She knows what the night is potentially capable of. She does not know if they have developed what is required. The only way to find out is to test, directly, seriously, without softening the test by making it something the tested party can pass, without fully extending themselves. She fights with the needle and the silk, fast and economical and entirely without wasted motion. She's checking things about the night that cannot be checked through observation alone, how they respond under pressure that requires immediate adaptation, what they do when the gap between attack and the window for response is very small, whether the void substance inside them translates into genuine combat capability or merely into the appearance of it. She watches while she fights. She's learning something with every exchange. When the night proves themselves, when the quality of their survival makes it clear that they have what is needed for the next phase, she withdraws. She says something, a fragment, not an explanation. Hornet does not explain herself in ways that require more words than the thing being explained actually needs, and what she says is enough to establish the direction of what comes next without making the exchange into a scene of revelation it does not need to be. She will appear again, several times, at each of the moments that matter. She will be there at the beginning of things and at the hinge points and at the end, and each time she will be exactly what the moment requires, precise, present, and unsparing in what she offers. The Mantis Lords go further, past the fungal wastes with their bioluminescent mushrooms and the spore-turbid air, and the creatures that move through it in strange, deliberate patterns, past the corruption-thick zones and the difficult geography of the upper fungal, and you reach something older, a passage down into a village that predates the Pale King's civilization, that was already what it is long before the Pale Worm arrived and began reshaping the underground in his own image. You reach the Mantis village, and if you pass through it without backing down from the threshold of the fight, you face the Lords. The Mantis Lords are 3 queens of the Mantis tribe, and they stand in their arena with the stillness of beings who have stood in this position many times before. They are not still because this encounter is routine to them. They give it full attention. They are still because readiness, in the Mantis tradition, does not look like tension. Readiness looks exactly like stillness. The tension is internal, coiled, available at the speed of reflex when the moment requires it. The Mantis tribe is ancient in ways that most of Hallownest's structures are not. The Pale King's civilization has depth. It is not shallow or recent, but the Mantis culture predates it, and more than that, declined to be absorbed by it in the usual way. When Hallownest expanded and the Pale King's influence pressed into the territories of the underground, the Mantis negotiated from a position of genuine power. They could not be simply conquered. The cost would have been too high, and the Pale King was pragmatic enough to understand costs. So he made the arrangement that suited both parties. The Mantis would act as the border between Deepnest and the broader Hallownest, holding back the creatures of that deep dark kingdom from moving freely into the territories above. In exchange, the Mantis would keep their village, their autonomy, their traditions untouched by the laws and hierarchies of Hallownest proper. The arrangement held, the Mantis held it. Through the infection spread, through the dissolution of the Pale King's administrative presence, through the years of ruin, the Mantis tribe maintained its village, its hierarchy, its particular culture of honour and trial, and the specific calibration of respect that comes from demonstrated capability rather than from title or patrimony. The Mantis Lords embody this culture completely. When you arrive at their arena, you arrive as an individual, not as a representative of Hallownest, not with any formal credentials, not with any title that the Mantis tradition would recognise. You arrive as a fighter. That is all the Mantis tradition requires, and all it sees. The question is simple. Can you fight well enough to deserve passage? This question is answered in the only way the Mantis tradition accepts as answer. You fight, and the result of the fighting tells the truth. They fight you one at a time, and they fight together, and they are genuinely dangerous throughout. Fast in ways that favour precision over force, difficult to predict in the specific sense that they have spent lifetimes developing combinations that arrive at unexpected angles. They are testing you rigorously. They are applying full capability to the examination. When you pass, when the fight concludes in your favour, when the knight's particular quality of combat has demonstrated itself adequate to the test, the Mantis Lords bow. All 3. The queens of this ancient tribe bowing to the small void creature that walked in through their gates and gave them a real fight and earned the passage the test was designed to gatekeep. They recognise what the knight is, not its specific history or political identity, but its quality, the kind of thing it is as demonstrated by how it fights. And in the Mantis tradition, that quality earns the full weight of its acknowledgement. The Mantis warriors who had been hostile step aside. The path to deepness opens. The Mantis tribe has seen what it needed to see, and responded with the precision of a culture that does not offer respect arbitrarily, and has nothing complicated to say once it has decided to offer it. It is one of the most quietly moving moments in Hallownest. An ancient people with their own uncompromised standards, in a kingdom that has been in collapse, maintaining the integrity of what their culture says a warrior is, and recognizing it when they encounter it. The traitor lord, the one who waits in Queen's Gardens, surrounded by the faction of Mantis who broke from the ancient pact, represents the shadow of this. A group of Mantis who abandoned the tradition, who allowed the infection's influence to alter their allegiance, who broke with the village and moved into the Queen's territory, and became something that the village's standards would classify as having forfeited the right to Mantis honour. The traitor lord leads these broken ones, fighting now not with the formal quality of the village's trial, but with a raw aggression that is the infection's contribution to whatever the Mantis once were. Zema Eor, who is the Grey Mourner, one of the 5 great knights, who kneels at the resting grounds wrapped in grey robes tending to a grief she barely speaks of, is connected to this fracture. Zema grieves for someone whose death is woven into the story of what happened when the traitor Mantis chose differently. She carries that grief alone, in the resting grounds, among the other sleepers. She asks the knight to carry a delicate flower to a grave, a single act of care for someone she cannot personally reach, an expression of love that the distance of death has made this indirect and this small. Zema's full tragedy belongs to the quiet of the resting grounds, where the game keeps many of its most private sorrows, where the things too painful for the main chambers of the kingdom come to rest. But the Mantis Lords held, through all of it, through the infection, through the breaking of part of their tribe, through the ruin of the kingdom they had contracted with, they held. The 3 queens still stand in that arena, still administer the trial, still bow to the worthy. The culture persists, exact and unbroken, in the middle of everything. The sole master and the tyrant. He dreamed of becoming. The City of Tears has towers. This detail matters because towers as architecture are statements of ambition. They are what is built when someone wants to rise, when someone wants their work to be visible from a distance, when the vertical dimension of space becomes associated with the vertical dimension of aspiration. The City of Tears was full of aspiration once. The bright lights and the falling rain and the elaborate stonework of its buildings were the physical expression of a civilization at one of its more confident points. A city that had the resources and the capability to build grandly and did. At the heart of the city, the Soul Sanctum rises above the other structures. It is a monument to a specific kind of aspiration that takes the ordinary desire to understand something and presses it past the boundary where understanding remains a means, and into the territory where understanding becomes an end unto itself, and then past that boundary as well, into the territory where the understanding is no longer sufficient, and what is sought is control. Mastery. The transformation of knowledge about a thing into ownership of the thing. The Soul Master, the being who presides over the Soul Sanctum, whose name the records of the kingdom have not preserved in any form the Knight can access, was a scholar of soul. Soul is the energy that runs through everything in Hallownest, through the soil, through the bodies of creatures, through the concept of thought itself, as the Pale King chose to distribute it. Soul is what allows the Knight to cast spells. Soul is what allows healing. Soul is the material that the Pale King used to give consciousness to the creatures over whom he wished to rule, pressing it into their shells through the structures of Hallownest that were built specifically for this purpose. It is not a metaphor, it is a substance. It moves, it can be taken and stored and used. The scholars of the Soul Sanctum studied this substance with extraordinary seriousness. They wanted to understand what it fundamentally was, not just how to use it in the applications that Hallownest had developed for it, but what it actually is at the most basic level of analysis. This is genuine intellectual ambition of the kind that produces real knowledge when it's held in the right relationship with honesty and rigour. The Sanctum was full of genuinely brilliant people who were genuinely working toward genuine understanding. The Soul Master's relationship to this work was different from the others, though. He was not satisfied with understanding, he wanted to master. And the distinction between those two orientations, one that seeks to comprehend a thing on its own terms, and one that seeks to bring a thing under one's own terms, is the distinction between a scholar and something else, something that uses the shape of scholarship as the container for an ambition that is really about power. He began to consume soul in ways that the other practitioners of the Sanctum were not doing, taking it in not to understand its properties in an academic sense, but to use it on his own body, altering himself by the repeated application of the substance he was studying, trying to transform through accumulation and concentration, and the willingness to push past the boundaries where caution lives into a condition he imagined would be above his ordinary nature. What transformation he achieved is visible in what you encounter. A figure who cycles through forms that represent different aspects of what the repeated consumption of soul has done to his original structure. He is not simply one thing. He's become several things layered over each other imperfectly, each layer representing a different stage in the self-modification, none of them quite integrating with the others into something that could be called resolution. He's a work in progress of himself, the experiment ongoing, the experimenter no longer fully capable of evaluating it. The infection found him in this condition and pressed through the cracks between the layers, and what it found was an entity already in the process of losing coherence in a particular direction, already in the process of becoming something driven by a force larger than ordinary intention, and it simply joined that process and carried it further. The Soul Master under the infection is the Soul Master's aspiration without the break of the original motivation, the wanting without the wanting for something, the consumption without the goal, the soul tyrant, the dream of him, accessed through the dream nail pressed to his remains, gives you the other version. The full intensity of what he imagined himself becoming, rendered in the precise quality of dream where imagination is indistinguishable from reality. It is fiercer than the actual encounter. It is faster, more relentless, more overwhelming in the specific way that dreams of one's own power tend to exceed the actual power available. It is the Soul Master as he believed he was reaching, the tyrant form he was constructing himself toward, every bit as driven and ambitious and consuming as he intended. The difference between the two fights is the difference between what he actually became and what he dreamed of becoming. The actual fight is a creature in the grip of an incomplete self-transformation, overtaken by an infection that removed the last traces of its original motivation. The dream fight is the aspiration itself, preserved without the infection and without the incoherence, showing you what the ambition looked like before the conditions turned against it. In the quiet of the city's rain, always raining, the grey and constant rain from which the city takes its name, there were once people simply working in the Sanctum, who only wanted to understand something, who came to the Soul Sanctum because they were curious about what soul was and how it worked. They stayed long enough in proximity to the Soul Master's particular vision and were gradually altered by that proximity. Not all by the Radiance's infection. Some just by the nature of working in a place where the aspiration ran so clearly in one unavoidable direction that it became the ambient assumption that the point was control, that the goal was mastery, that understanding was only worth having if it terminated in ownership. The rain in the City of Tears neither cares about nor notices any of this. It falls regardless. The broken vessel and the lost kin, deeper still, past the City of Tears, past the resting grounds, past the royal waterways, and down into the place where Hallownest's architecture changes character entirely. The ancient basin is not a residential or transit space, not somewhere creatures lived and moved through in the course of ordinary life. It is a foundational space. The place where the infrastructure of the Pale King's most ambitious project sits, large and formal and purpose-built, the physical environment created to serve the specific and terrible work of making vessels. Vessels? The night is one. The Hollow Knight is one. There were thousands of others, all the Void Children who fell into the abyss at the bottom of the basin, who failed to bear the Pale King's mark, who were absorbed back into the darkness they'd been pulled from. The entire project of the vessels was here, in this part of Hallownest. The basin holds the architecture of that project, and the basin holds some of its results. Somewhere in the passages of the ancient basin there is one that did not fall into the abyss and did not pass the Pale King's examination. One that remained in the basin, in the corridors between the great structures, persisting in the emptiness that is the substance of its composition. A sibling of the night, shaped similarly, originating in the same project and the same void. Left behind in the specific way that the not quite right are left behind when there is a project underway, and the not quite right are removed from consideration but not otherwise resolved. The broken vessel, the name given after the fact by the understanding that comes from encountering it in its present state, was found by the infection in its condition of designed emptiness, and the infection, which operates through minds and fills the spaces between thoughts with its orange urgency, encountered something here that had no mind to work through, and no spaces between thoughts to fill, and responded to that absence by occupying the space the mind would have used had there been one. The void inside the broken vessel did not resist the infection the way a mind would resist it. There was no mind to resist, but the infection's occupation of a void-composed body was not what it was in organic bodies. The result is something strange. A creature that moves with the infection's frenetic energy, but without any of the infection's characteristic organizing drive toward the Radiance's particular goals. It is the infection with nothing to work through, producing action without direction, energy without intention. The orbs of mixed orange and void that pulse from the broken vessel during the fight, those simultaneous presences of two fundamentally opposite things, are the visible expression of this occupation. Void and soul light, the two opposing substances of Hallownest's cosmology, coexisting in a body that was made of one and is filled by the other. The instability is everywhere in the fight, the movements that shift suddenly, the eruptions that seem to originate from both the exterior and the interior of the creature simultaneously. You fight through it because there is path deeper than the broken vessel. The way down goes through this encounter, and you need the way down. Afterward, after the fight, after some time has passed, if you return to the broken vessel's remains and carry the dream nail you have developed, what you find is unexpected. The dream nail pressed to the shell of a vessel designed to be empty finds something nonetheless. there is a residue. Not consciousness precisely, not the experience of a mind that lived and thought and was then extinguished, but something in the vicinity of feeling, something that the void composition of the body developed over the time of its existence that is not quite nothing and not quite thought, something closer to the specific sadness of a being that was designed to be empty and discovered in the only way available to it, that emptiness is not nothing, that even a void can accumulate experience, that the absence of mind does not guarantee the absence of something that might, in different circumstances, have become mind. The lost kin is quieter than the broken vessel, slower in certain of its phases, less explosively chaotic in its energy. It is the dream of the broken vessel, the residue of experience in the shell, and what the dream shows is not the infection's energy, but something underneath the energy that the infection was running on top of, something more plaintive, something that resonates with the specific grief of being made for a purpose that was essentially to be nothing, and finding that nothing is not as simple as the maker believed. The night, moving through the ancient basin, passes these encounters on their way to the abyss. They do not know, at this point, that the abyss is where they came from. They do not yet know the full story of what they are and why they exist, and what the thousands of siblings meant who fell into the darkness below. All of that comes later, with the king soul and the void heart and the terrible clarity of seeing your own origin clearly. For now, they pass through a broken cathedral of their own making and fight the sibling that remained and carry the knowledge of its dream forward. Let your body be heavy. Let your breathing be slow. We are moving into the deep places now. Deepness is different from every other part of Hallownest, in a way that goes beyond the simple difference of geography or ecology. Every other region of the kingdom, however ruined or however far from the City of Tears and the Pale King's administrative centre, bears the marks of that civilization. Architecture shaped by the particular aesthetic Hallownest developed. Passages modified by the presence of creatures who understood tool use and deliberate construction. Spaces that reveal the weight of intention even in their current collapsed state. Even the most remote and organic-feeling regions of Hallownest were touched by the civilization that spread through the underground. Deepness was not touched in that way. The passages of Deepness twist back on themselves with a spatial logic that is not human logic, not the logic of something that plans and implements and desires navigability. They are organic in the genuine sense, not styled to appear organic, not designed with organic aesthetics, but genuinely grown, shaped by the lives and movements of creatures who never valued navigability, by the standards of creatures who use maps. The darkness in Deepness is complete. There is no soul light here, no pale luminescence from the walls, no architectural accommodation of the need to see. Deepness does not believe you need to see. Somewhere in the deepest and most disorienting passages of Deepness, the passages that circle back in ways that confuse even careful navigation, that present corridors that resemble other corridors with a precision that defeats pattern recognition. There is a creature that has been here for a very long time. It is called Nosk. And Nosk, in its fundamental nature, is not any particular species so much as it is a capacity. The capacity to become what something else needs to see. Mimicry in the natural world serves several functions, and most of them are defensive. The creature that looks like something dangerous, or something inedible, or something that belongs in a context where threats are not expected, survives at a higher rate than the creature who looks accurately like itself. But there is a more sophisticated kind of mimicry, a kind that goes beyond the physical presentation of a threatening or harmless appearance into the specific space of recognizing what a particular observer is drawn toward and presenting exactly that. This kind of mimicry requires something like intelligence, requires reading the observer, not just looking like a general category of thing, but looking like the specific thing this specific observer responds to. Nosk does the sophisticated kind. It watches, in whatever way sensing works for a creature that has been in the dark of deepness long enough to develop whatever sensory apparatus is adequate for that darkness, what a traveller is drawn toward, what they follow, what their instincts respond to without the mediation of deliberate choice, and then it presents itself as that thing, for the night, moving through deepness toward whatever destination lies deeper. The night sees a silhouette, small and precise and moving with the particular quality of movement that belongs to void-composed things, slightly gravity-defying, slightly too light, slightly too quick in the way of something that does not have the full weight of organic matter. The night's own silhouette, the shape of itself moving ahead of it through the dark of deepness' most confusing passages. There is something below the level of deliberate thought that responds to seeing yourself, the deep body level response to recognizing a shape that matches the shape of your own body, even in a creature as unusual and void-composed and consciously minimal as the night, is something like, "This is mine. This is connected to me. This is safe in the way that the self is safe because the self is known. Follow. Nosk knows this. Or rather, Nosk is this knowledge implemented as a body, the knowledge implemented so thoroughly and for so long that the distinction between knowing it and being it may have dissolved. The chamber where Nosk reveals itself, where the mimicry concludes and the actual encounter occurs, is large and circular, and in some sense built, suggesting that this is a place that has been used for this purpose many times. The thing that Nosk actually is beneath the mimicry is not small and not precise. It is large and composed in layers, layers of absorbed mimicry, perhaps, sediment from every previous imitation, the accumulated physical residue of becoming many different things over a very long time. It is terrible in the way that things are terrible when the familiar is comprehensively violated, when something presents itself as recognizable at the foundational level and then reveals the recognition was never accurate, was always a tool rather than a truth. There is something in Nosk's existence that is about isolation. Deepness was not the same kind of lonely as the Brooding Molek sealed chamber. Loneliness in deepness is ecological, woven into the nature of the place itself, not the exception, but the normal condition of life in complete darkness, where every encounter is potentially predatory. Nosk has been that kind of alone for an extraordinary amount of time, long enough that the practice of mimicry, originally perhaps a hunting technique, a way to draw prey near, has become the substance of what it is. It no longer mimics in order to hunt. It mimics because mimicry is what it does, the way a creature that exists in water swims. There may not be a Nosk beneath the mimicry anymore. There may only be the capacity for mimicry operating as itself. When the night defeats Nosk in its central chamber, the passage through deepness continues. The dark of that place does not change. Deepness is very old and has seen many individual encounters inside itself, and registers none of them as significant to the ongoing fact of its existence. Flukem, the royal waterways are beneath the City of Tears. The vast and complex drainage system through which the city's constant rain eventually flows, the infrastructure that makes the City of Tears habitable by moving the water that never stops falling, somewhere it can go without drowning everything. The royal waterways are not designed for visitors. They are functional spaces, pipe-adjacent, built for throughput rather than habitation, and yet they are inhabited by creatures who were already in the underground before the waterways were constructed above them, and who simply absorbed the waterways into their ecological range when the construction came. Among these creatures, the Fluke family is the most obviously native. The Flukemons that populate the waterways, round and simple and primarily motivated by the basic drives of things that have always lived in wet and dark, move through the pipes and channels with the comfort of complete adaptation. They were here first. The waterways were built around them, or above them, or through the territories they had occupied for generations. They did not relocate. They adapted the new infrastructure to the old habits. Fluke is the mother of all of them, not as figure of speech but as biological fact. The central organism from which the Flukemon population of the waterways originates physically, through a generative process that Flukemon has been engaged in for long enough that the relationship between her and the waterways Fluke population has become something ecological rather than familial in the usual sense. She's very old and very large and largely immobile, past the point in her biological development where mobility of the kind other creatures maintain is possible or necessary. What Flukemon does is generate. That is her function, completely and without remainder. The infection found her in the waterways and did what it does to organisms whose primary mode of interacting with the world is generative. It altered the generation. More and faster, and of a character slightly different from what healthy generation would produce. The orange light in the eyes of the Flukemons who emerge from her now, the edge of aggression that was not there before, the slightly heightened drive toward conflict that the infection reliably produces. Flukemon herself does not fight in any conventional sense. She generates, and the generation is her combat. The space between her and the night fills with what she produces, and the production is the obstacle. There is something about Flukemon's story that is both small and complete. She's not entangled in Hallownest's politics. She's not connected to the Pale King's desperate plans, or the Radiance's ancient grief, or the specific tragedy of the vessels, or the complicated honour of the Mantis, or any of the grand narratives of the kingdom. She is the queen of a drain, the mother of the wet dark, something old and simple and biological, doing the one thing she does in the specific location she has always occupied for her entire existence. The infection made her dangerous to pass. Before the infection, she was probably not dangerous to pass at all. Probably simply large and passive and generative, something you moved around in the waterways with care and without particular difficulty. The orange light made the traversal into something that requires you to go through her rather than past her, which is the infection's usual contribution, converting the passive into the active, the background into the foreground, the encountered into the encountered. When the encounter concludes, the waterways are quiet again. The rain from above continues to flow through. The pipes carry it where it goes. The old creatures of the deep dark continue doing what they have always done, in the spaces that have always been theirs. Dung Defender and the story of Ogrim. Here is Ogrim. Here is one of the most genuinely affecting figures in the whole of Hallownest. Someone whose story deserves every word of attention it receives, whose situation in the royal waterways when you find him is the conclusion of a long arc that began with honour and ended in a kind of voluntary exile that is also a kind of punishment and also a kind of love. Ogrim was one of the 5 great knights. He served the Pale King with what appears to have been a wholehearted devotion, not the devotion of someone who calculated that service was advantageous, but the devotion of someone who genuinely believed in what they were serving. He believed in Hallownest. He believed in the civilization the Pale King was building. He believed that what they were doing, keeping the kingdom together, defending it, being the sharp personal instrument of its defense at the highest level of capability the kingdom could produce, was genuinely and importantly good. And Hallownest fell anyway. The infection spread. The Pale King's plan failed. The Hollow Knight's seal cracked, and the Radiance's corruption leaked through and moved through the kingdom in the way that the failure of a fundamental system moves through everything that depended on that system, comprehensively, without exception, reaching into spaces that had thought themselves secure and demonstrating that the security was contingent on a foundation that was no longer holding. For the 5 great knights, for the individuals who had devoted themselves to the defence and the maintenance of the thing that was now not being maintained, that was not being defended, that was in fact actively disintegrating. This failure was not simply a political catastrophe. It was a personal one. They had defined themselves by their service. The service was the substance of their identity, the framework that gave their capability its direction and their loyalty its object. Without the kingdom, without the Pale King's guiding presence, without the structure of Hallownest as a functioning civilization, each of the 5 had to find some way of existing in the absence of the thing that had made their existence meaningful. Ogrim found his way to the royal waterways, descended into the drainage system beneath the city that was the crown jewel of the kingdom he had served, put on the Dung Defender role, not appointed to it, not asked to be it, but chose it, made himself into the thing that protects the waterways from intrusion, gave himself a job in a place that no one else was watching, that no one would value or observe or confirm as meaningful. That was in almost every discernible way below the dignity of what he had been. He chose it because it was something to be, because the alternative to having a function, for someone who had been as completely defined by function as Ogrim was, might have been nothing that could be survived. He filled the hole left by Hallownest's fall with the most available humble occupation he could find, and became very good at it, and stayed with it, in the waterways, alone, for as long as it took for the night to arrive. When you fight the Dung Defender, you fight someone who has displaced his original identity completely behind the role. He is the Dung Defender. He is the guardian of these specific tunnels. He is this particular job performed with this particular dedication. And while the performance is genuine, the fight is real, the difficulty is real, there is underneath it something that is recognizable as what Ogrim actually is. Someone doing something with everything they have, because having something to do is the only way some people survive loss. After you defeat him, after the fight concludes and the Dung Defender collapses and the persona momentarily falls, you meet Ogrim, the actual one. He recognizes certain things about the knight that the Dung Defender persona was not equipped to process, and in recognizing them he becomes briefly available as the person he was rather than the role he chose as shelter. He is warm. He is sad in a way that is not asking for sympathy. He is still, at the core of whatever the years in the waterways have done to him, the person who believed completely in the value of what he was defending and has not been able to stop believing in it, even though the thing he believed in is gone. The White Defender, the dream version of Ogrim, the figure you fight when you press the dream nail to the Dung Defender's remains at the waterway's deepest point, is Ogrim as he sees himself at his best. This is not the Dung Defender. This is the Great Knight, in full capability, fighting with the full integrity of the person he was when he was what he still believes himself to be at his most essential. The dream is where the self-image that has been buried under years of the Dung Defender persona still lives. The image of Ogrim as a warrior of Hallownest, fighting worthy opponents, being what the Pale King recognised and chose. It is fiercer than the actual fight. It is more demanding. It is the fight you would have had if you had encountered Ogrim at his height, rather than in this diminished and self-imposed exile. The gap between the dream and the waterways is the size of what Hallownest's failure cost him. The gap between who he dreams of being and who he has consigned himself to being in the absence of the thing that made the former available. He chose the waterways. He chose the role. But the dream remembers Ogrim the Great Knight, and it does not forgive the waterways its smallness. If you complete the fight with the White Defender enough times, if you come back repeatedly to meet Ogrim at his best, he eventually returns to the surface. He goes to the Pale King's throne room. He kneels before the empty throne, in the space where the Pale King once sat, and stays there. The simplest expression of the most profound loyalty. The king is gone, the throne is empty. Ogrim kneels anyway, because loyalty that is contingent on the presence of its object is not actually loyalty. It is just a response to incentive. Real loyalty, the kind Ogrim has always carried, does not require the object to be present. It simply continues. Let your eyes be closed. Let all the tension leave your hands. Ogrim is kneeling before an empty throne, and that is a true thing, and it is all the more true for being chosen rather than compelled. The Watcher Knights and the dreaming Lurion. The Watcher's spire in the City of Tears rises above the other towers. A deliberate architectural statement, the declaration built in stone that whoever lives here has chosen to be above, to be the watching presence in the vertical dimension that the city otherwise uses only for rain. Lurion the Watcher built his life around the act of observation. He had a telescope. He had the spire. He had the particular practice of turning that telescope toward different parts of Hallownest on different nights, and watching, simply watching, carefully, without necessarily intervening in what he saw, attending to the kingdom from a position of elevation that was both literal and metaphorical. Lurion was one of the three dreamers. When the Pale King needed beings of sufficient power to maintain the seal on the Hollow Knight's prison, Lurion agreed immediately. He agreed, by all accounts, with something that went beyond calculation into the territory of genuine eagerness. Not eagerness for the sleep itself, but eagerness to be of use in the maximum way available to him, to have his existence contribute to the protection of the thing he had spent his life watching. He loved Hallownest. He loved it in the specific, observational, attentive way that characterized everything about him, not demonstratively, not through declaration, but through the continuous practice of paying attention to it. The telescope turned toward its different corners, the vigil maintained. The watching that was, in Lurion's personal cosmology, its own form of care. When he agreed to become a dreamer, he was choosing to make that care permanent, to make his devotion to Hallownest the thing his body would do for as long as the seal needed maintaining, to lie in that eternal sleep with his consciousness threaded into the maintenance of the lock, watching over the kingdom in the only way left available, from inside a dream rather than from inside a tower. The transition from the telescope to the dreamer's chamber is, for Lurion, continuous with his character, rather than a departure from it. He had always been the one who watched. Now he would watch from a different position, in a different state, for a purpose whose importance he had never doubted. The Watcher Knights who guard his physical body, the constructs that fill the Watcher's spire and protect the sleeping Lurion from any intrusion that might disturb the dreamer's slumber, are not living things in the biological sense. They are constructs, animated, capable, built for the specific purpose of guarding. Lurion had them made before he entered the dream, or had them in place throughout the period of his watching, or some combination. The details of their creation are not preserved in any form the knight encounters. What is preserved is their function, entirely intact. They guard. They are still guarding. Years into Hallownest's collapse, in the Watcher's spire of a city that has been emptied by the infection, the Watcher Knights are still in formation. Fighting multiple Watcher Knights simultaneously, in the large chamber where they wait, is one of the more challenging encounters in the City of Tears. They coordinate in ways that pure instinct doesn't coordinate. Their movements respond to each other, creating angles of attack that require constant awareness of all of them simultaneously, rather than the ability to focus on any single opponent. This coordination is the sign of something built rather than born, trained responses that do not tire and do not second guess, and do not deviate from the parameters they were constructed with. The purpose they serve is completed, in a sense, by the time the knight reaches the Watcher's spire. Lurion will need to be reached, his dream needs to be broken, his seal released, as part of the process of freeing the Hollow Knight. The Watcher Knights guarding him become the obstacle between that necessity and its execution. They're doing exactly what they were built to do. They are doing it faithfully in the absence of the Watcher himself, in the absence of any authority that might redirect them. They are the last expression of Lurion's care for Hallownest. The constructs he made to protect his sleeping body, still protecting it, with no instruction needed because none was ever required for something built to be unconditionally loyal to a single function. When the knight reaches Lurion's sleeping form and uses the dream nail to break his dream and release his seal, when Lurion dissolves into light the way dreamers dissolve when their dreams are broken, there is something both sorrowful and right about it. He chose to be the lock. The lock, having served its purpose and being now released, is the completion of the choice he made. He watched over Hallownest until the very end of his watching, and then the light faded, and the Watcher's spire was just a tall, empty building in a rainy city, and the telescope collected whatever the years collected on the instruments of people who were no longer there to use them. Umu and the teacher's last protection. Monomon the teacher was remarkable in the particular way of people who are both very intelligent and very self-aware about what their intelligence can and cannot accomplish, the rarer quality of the two. She understood the plague that was sweeping Hallownest. She understood the Pale King's plan to seal the Hollow Knight. She could evaluate the plan clearly, see its weaknesses alongside its necessity, and agree to participate in it anyway because she could also perform the calculation that said, the plan is flawed but the alternatives are worse, and the flawed plan is better than standing aside. She had conditions. Monomon was as pragmatic about the terms of her sacrifice as Hera was, though where Hera's condition was personal, a child, Monomon's was oriented toward continuation. She wanted her knowledge preserved. She had spent her existence as a teacher, accumulating understanding and developing methodologies, and building the collection of preserved memories that filled the teacher's archives, a structure she had designed and built and filled with the distilled knowledge of her life. She wanted this to survive, and she wanted one particular person to survive alongside it. Quirrell, her student, her companion, the being she cared for most specifically. She gave Quirrell her mask, the piece of herself encoded with something sufficient to protect him from the infection, and she entered the dream. Monomon chose her own specific form of the dreamer's sacrifice. She did not simply agree to sleep and accept whatever protection that sleep required. She became one with the entity that guarded her, Umu. The enormous jellyfish-like creature that fills the teacher's archives is not simply a creature placed there as a guard. It is something Monomon participated in creating, or perhaps something she transformed into in part, a form and a function woven together in the way that Monomon consistently wove form and function together in everything she did. The connection between Umu and Monomon's sleeping body is not the connection between a guard and the guarded. It is something closer. Umu cannot be conventionally fought when you first encounter it in the teacher's archives. The shell that would normally make engaging an enemy possible simply doesn't exist on Umu in the ordinary way. It floats, it generates hazards, it occupies space, but it cannot be struck in the conventional manner. The method of harming Umu requires using Quirrell, who arrives at that moment, returns to the archives, to the teacher's last space, carrying the mask that Monomon gave him, and with it the knowledge of how to help. He uses the mask, the shield drops, the night engages. The timing of Quirrell's presence matters enormously to what the encounter means. He has been travelling all of Hallownest, an amnesiac wanderer whose name he knows but whose history he doesn't, carrying a mask that was given to him by someone he can no longer remember. The mask protected him from the infection. The archives that the mask was meant to eventually lead him back to, and the sleeping teacher inside, are what the mask was always pointing toward. And when he arrives for the encounter and uses it, he's participating in the last act of Monomon's care for him. She arranged, across the entire architecture of this encounter, for him to be the one who is present at the end, for him to be needed. For the reunion, however strange and painful it is, him present outside the dream while she is inside it permanently, the teacher and student on opposite sides of a state they cannot cross, to at least occur. After the encounter with Umu concludes, Monomon's dream can be broken. Her form dissolves into light. She is released in the way dreamers are released, the seal contributing to the overall progression of the night's work toward the black egg. Quirrell's mask, relieved of its function, dissolves. He will eventually make his way to the blue lake at the edge of Hallownest and sit at the water's edge and find there the peace that the entirety of his wandering had been moving toward, the resolution that comes when the specific thing you have been doing, even without knowing you were doing it, is finished. He sits at the lake. He is content. It is one of the few genuinely peaceful images the game offers. The Collector. There is a tower at the edge of Hallownest, not one of the city's formal towers, not one of the spires that was built to house authority or aspiration, or the organised study of soul. This one is out toward Kingdom's Edge, where the architecture grows sparse and the creatures grow rare and the sense of being at the boundary of the knowable intensifies. The tower is called the Tower of Love. The name was given to it by, or because of its occupant, and the occupant is the Collector. The Collector collects bugs, in jars, living bugs, captured from wherever they were found in Hallownest, sealed in the glass containers that fill the tower's shelves and hang from its ceilings and rest in its corners. Many of them are alive when you find them, some are dead. All of them were put there by the Collector, who moves through the tower with apparent delight, who seems to regard the collection as a positive and accomplished thing, who by all behavioural evidence believes that what he is doing is good. He is cheerful in the particular way of beings who have decided how things are and no longer examine that decision. He moves quickly. He throws out canisters that release the smaller creatures he has collected along the way, deploying them as defence without any apparent awareness of what it means to use trapped living creatures as tools in a fight. The fight has a quality of manic energy that is different from the frenetic quality of the infected. It is not quite the Radiance's orange compulsion driving him. or it is that layered over something that was already this way. What was there before the infection, and how much the infection amplified or altered it, is a question the game leaves productively open. What is clear is the loneliness. The tower is called the Tower of Love. The jars are filled with living things. The collector has, in his particular and badly calibrated way, been trying to have company. He has been trying to not be alone. The creatures in the jars, sealed, yes, removed from their contexts, placed in a situation of confinement that is not what they would choose, are his attempt at the thing that every being with enough consciousness to feel isolation eventually reaches for: proximity to other living things, other presences, something that proves you are not alone in the space you occupy. It does not work in the way that all badly calibrated expressions of a genuine need eventually do not work, because the need is real, and the attempt to address it is genuinely motivated, but the specific form the attempt takes is not adequate to what it is trying to achieve. You cannot have company by putting living things in jars. The things in the jars are not present with you in the way that company requires. They are contained, which is a different thing, and the distinction between containment and presence is the distinction between not being alone and having the condition of proximity that prevents ordinary loneliness without providing any of the substance of connection. The collector is genuinely disturbed. His behaviour is genuinely harmful. These things are also true simultaneously with the sadness of what the behaviour originates in. They do not cancel each other out. The jars are both wrong and an expression of something real, and both of those things can be held at once. When the fight concludes, the tower is emptied. The jars that can be opened are opened. The creatures inside are freed, however disorienting or insufficient the freedom is at this point in Hallownest's decline. The tower is just a tower. The shelves are empty, and somewhere at the edge of Kingdom, another lonely thing has found a conclusion of one kind or another. Close your eyes more fully. Let your breathing slow. There are many more to remember tonight. The night is patient. It holds everything. Battle of the No-Name Warrior. No eyes in the resting grounds and the stone sanctuary, and the places where the dead are held in the particular Hallownest custom of preservation through the dream. In these quiet spaces where the kingdom's war dead rest in their warriors' graves, there are 6 warrior spirits who remain accessible through the dream nail. They are called the Warrior Dreams, and each of them has a story specific to their life in Hallownest, their nature, their particular relationship to the forces that shape the kingdom. Tonight we visit all of them. No Eyes first, she was a moth. The Moth tribe was ancient in Hallownest, one of the oldest indigenous peoples, a tribe with their own cosmology, their own sacred practices, their own specific relationship to the dream realm that preceded the Pale King's redefinition of what dream meant in this kingdom. The Moths worshipped the Radiance, the ancient dream deity, the luminous entity whose light the Moths understood as the source of all meaningful experience, whose presence in the dream realm organized the Moth's spiritual life around warmth and memory and the specific kind of connection that comes from shared dream. When the Pale King came and gave souls to the creatures of Hallownest and drew them into his civilization, the Moths faced a particular choice. The cosmology they had built around the Radiance did not fit well within the Pale King's framework. The Pale King was not interested in sharing the devotional attention of his subjects with an older deity whose nature was difficult to incorporate into the administrative structure of a kingdom. And so the Moths, over time, by the mechanisms of a choice made over generations rather than in a single moment, began to forget the Radiance. The forgetting was the price of belonging to Hallownest. This forgetting was the thing that drove the Radiance to her infection. Being forgotten was, for a being of her nature the specific catastrophe, the loss of presence, of relevance, of the attention that constitutes existence for a deity whose existence is defined by being recognized and remembered and held in the minds of others. She retaliated through dreams, which were her domain, pressing into the sleeping minds of the bugs who had forgotten her, and beginning the process that would eventually become the plague that swept the kingdom. No eyes heard this happening before most others did. She heard the screams in her dreams, the suffering of bugs whose sleep was being invaded, whose minds were being altered while they were in the vulnerable state of unconsciousness, who woke changed in ways they did not understand and could not resist. She was a warrior, a guardian specifically, someone whose role was to protect those who could not protect themselves. And the enemy this time was something that moved through sleep itself, something that could only reach its victims when they were unconscious, something that she could not fight with a weapon because it came through the dream. She removed her own eyes. The logic is brutal and completely coherent. If the infection spreads through the dream, and the dream is accessed through sleep, and she cannot stop sleeping but she can stop dreaming, and stopping dreaming requires severing the connection between her sleeping mind and the dream realm, and severing that connection completely means removing the organs most directly, connected to her perception of the visual realm, then this is what must be done. She did it to protect the others she was responsible for, to remove herself as a potential vector, to be someone who could not carry what was passing through dreams into the waking world. The courage required for this is not the courage of combat, which is the courage most warriors practice and develop. It is a quieter and more specific courage, the willingness to do a terrible thing to yourself because you have correctly calculated that it is what the situation requires. No eyes made this calculation. She executed it. She continued to function, blinded, in the stone sanctuary, protecting those she could protect through the remaining duration of her life. Her warrior's dream, the fight you have with her through the dream nail, reflects what she was: agile, defensive in posture, relying on the non-visual senses that the removal of sight forced her to develop fully. She fills the space with the small tracking spirits that the dream produces as combat mechanics, creating an environment that requires awareness of the whole space rather than focus on a single point. She fights as someone who learned to navigate entirely without sight and became, in that limitation, something extraordinary. She deserved her rest. She earned it completely. What she did for others. Zero made an oath. This may be the most essential fact about him. Not where he came from or what his specific history was before Hallownest's fall, but that he swore allegiance to the Pale King and the kingdom, and that the oath persisted beyond his life and his physical death, and the ruin of the thing he swore allegiance to, and that he is still here, in the resting grounds, still bound by a promise he made when the promise had a clear object. He appears as a warrior monk, robed precise, carrying a blade he uses to generate the ranged attacks that characterize his dream fight. There is a formal quality to his combat, a ceremony in how he engages, that speaks of training, but also of something more deliberate than training. The cultivation of a particular relationship to one's own capabilities, in which capability is not merely practical, but has meaning attached to it. You fight in a certain way, because fighting in a certain way is part of what you are, part of the oath you have made about what you will be. Zero's technique is the visible expression of a commitment that went beyond the technical, into the domain of self-definition. He swore to the Pale King, and the Pale King is gone, faded, dissolved, absorbed into the White Lady's root system in some form, or simply absent from any active presence in the kingdom, and Hallownest is in ruin, and the oath has no clear living object to be fulfilled for, and 0 remains. This is the specific kind of loyalty that becomes something almost philosophical in the absence of its original context. The loyalty that continues not because the object is present to receive it, but because the one who swore finds the oath to be definitional of themselves, rather than merely a commitment to an external thing. He swore. The swearing is who he is. The falling of Hallownest and the dissolution of the king does not change who he is. It leaves the loyalty without direction, but the loyalty itself is not dependent on direction. His dream fight is difficult in the way of something that is fully committed to what it is doing. There is no hesitation in it, no capacity for doubt to enter. He throws himself into the encounter with the completeness of a being who has made a fundamental decision and does not revisit it. This is what oath-bound things look like. This is what it looks like when a commitment has been made so deeply that the environment can change entirely around it, and the commitment remains unchanged inside it. When you defeat him and his dream concludes, he is released. Whatever the warrior dream was holding, whatever kept his spirit here in the resting grounds, accessible through the dream nail, completes. He has been met. He has been tested. The encounter has occurred, and the existence in suspension that the warrior dream represented can conclude. Elder Who came to Hallownest from somewhere else. This alone distinguishes him from many of the beings whose stories the kingdom holds. He was not native, not born in the underground or drawn from the creatures who had lived in these tunnels before the Pale King arrived. He came deliberately, from outside, as a traveller seeking something the kingdom was known for in the wider world above. He was a healer, a wanderer who carried both practical medicine and the spirit of itinerant care that moves through communities in certain cultures as a valuable and recognised role. The person who comes from outside, who brings techniques and knowledge from different regions, who offers help and moves on, whose presence is temporary and whose contribution is specific. He had travelled extensively before arriving at Hallownest. He knew different ways of understanding the body and its vulnerabilities. He knew different approaches to the relationship between the individual and the larger forces that act on the individual. And when he heard of the kingdom in the underground, this experiment in consciousness bestowed by a pale king, this civilization built from the elevation of creatures who had previously been simple, he was interested enough to come and see it. He came hoping to learn and share, to engage with the civilization organized differently from any he had encountered, to bring what he knew and take back what was here. He found a kingdom already in decline, already showing the strain of the infection's early spread, already in the process of becoming what it was becoming. He stayed anyway. He continued to try to do what healers do, address specific suffering in specific bodies, one encounter at a time, regardless of whether the large-scale system the individual bodies existed within was recoverable. He died in Hallownest. His grave is in the fungal wastes, which is an odd location, not one of the more dignified or prestigious regions of the kingdom, that might suggest where his wandering took him when the larger paths were no longer available. The fungal wastes, with their thick air and their strange bioluminescence and the particular weird beauty of a region that has grown entirely to its own internal logic, answering to nothing outside itself. His warrior dream fight is measured, characteristic of someone whose primary orientation toward others was care rather than combat, and for whom the warrior's dream is something undertaken with a seriousness that is also slightly against the grain of his fundamental nature. He is a healer who can fight, not a warrior who chose medicine. The distinction is present in the fight. He engages with full commitment, but without the martial purity of someone who was always primarily this. When the encounter concludes, there is something appropriate in the release. He was far from wherever he started. He had come seeking to contribute, and had done as much as the circumstances allowed. The rest is earned. Gorb believed himself to be in possession of a great mind. He believed this fully, without reservations that the evidence available to him produced in anyone outside that belief. He spoke of ascending to a higher plane, of possessing insights unavailable to ordinary beings, of reaching a state of understanding that would in turn enable a transcendence beyond the merely physical existence where his extraordinary mind had so far been trapped. There is a question about Gorb that the game does not definitively resolve. Was any of it true? Was there genuine profundity behind the outsized self-assessment, or was the self-assessment the whole thing? The warrior dream fight is not one of the game's more contextually heavy encounters. Gorb is light, relatively speaking, both in the narrative weight attached to him and in the character of the encounter itself. He is a somewhat round creature with an intensity of conviction that his self-image does not quite support, and the tension between those two things has a quality that is, in its way, gently humorous. But there is something real in Gorb, even in that observation. The desire to be more than one is, to be in possession of a great mind, to be ascending towards something, to matter in the way that great minds matter. This desire is common. The version Gorb developed may have been ambitious in proportion to what Gorb actually was, but the underlying reach, the wish to be something larger than the present condition, to have a self that extends beyond the merely present and physical into something more capable and more seen. There is no person in Hallownest, or outside it, who is entirely free of some form of that wish. His warrior dream is quick and demanding in the specific ways that quick and demanding things require presence in the moment. He is fought and concluded, and his spirit finds whatever rest followed the conviction that he was always on the way to something better. Marmu. She was young. This is the thing about Marmu that the few lore details preserved make clear above everything else. Her story is short because she herself was not old when it ended, because she was still in the middle of the process of becoming what she might have been rather than having arrived there. She was a student of a fighting tradition. She had someone teaching her, a master, a teacher whose character and specific identity are not preserved in the available record, but who clearly saw in Marmu something worth developing. She was receiving instruction. She had potential. The warrior's grave and the dream fight both suggest someone who was developing genuine capability without having fully arrived at it. There are the rough edges of still becoming in how the dream encounter feels, the not quite polished quality of something that was in the process of refinement when the process was interrupted. She was getting there. She was moving in a direction that the people who could evaluate these things thought was worth continuing. The infection, or some other aspect of Hallownest's disaster, ended her before she arrived. She is young in her grave. She is young in her dream. She is young in the small, rounded, not quite finished quality of the encounter, and fighting her, defeating her dream, releasing the warrior spirit that has been waiting in suspension in the resting grounds, has something in it of witnessing the potential that did not have time to become itself. She did not get enough time. Many in Hallownest did not get enough time. Hallownest ended before almost everyone in it was finished. and the specific sadness of Mamu is the specific sadness of youth cut short rather than a long life, or a great project concluded in circumstances too cruel, but at least at the end of something that had been fully itself. Rest here for a moment. The breath moves in and out at its own pace. We are still moving through the warrior dreams, and each of them deserves their attention. Galion made a weapon. He crafted a flail, a specific and demanding kind of weapon, one that requires a particular combination of strength and timing that makes it unforgiving of errors in a way that simpler weapons are not, and departed Hallownest. He went out toward the edges of the kingdom, toward Kingdom's Edge, toward the sharp boundary where Hallownest gives way to something that is no longer Hallownest in any meaningful sense. He went there to wait. What he was waiting for was someone who wielded the Dream Nail. He had heard of the Dream Nail, this object of Radiance-adjacent power that allowed its bearer to read the residue of consciousness in the objects and creatures of Hallownest, to harvest the dream energy of sleeping or dead beings, to enter the dream realm in a specific and intentional way that was different from the Radiance's dream infection. He understood the Dream Nail to be carried by someone of real capability, not because the object itself required extraordinary wielders to function, but because reaching the places he went to wait would require extraordinary capability simply to get there. He wanted to be tested, more than wanted. He had structured his remaining existence around this wish. He had gone to Kingdom's Edge specifically because he believed a worthy opponent, a Dream Nail wielder, would eventually come if he waited long enough. He was willing to wait as long as it took. He invested his remaining life in the certainty of the encounter, and the encounter did eventually come with the knight's arrival in Kingdom's Edge, and the fight occurred. There is something about Galion's choice, going out to the edge of everything and waiting specifically for someone worthy to fight, that speaks to a particular kind of person whose relationship to combat is about more than the outcome. He was not waiting to defeat someone or to be famous for having been defeated. He was waiting for the encounter to occur, for the test to happen, for the quality of the exchange itself rather than for its result. This is the warrior's pure aspiration, for the fight to be real, to happen between people each of whom is genuinely capable of challenging the other, to produce the specific kind of knowledge that only real engagement with a worthy opponent produces. He got what he waited for. The night came. The flail moved through the dream in the specific demanding patterns that Galion had built his capability around. The encounter was real. He was satisfied by it, in whatever sense satisfaction is available to a dream that then concludes. Markoth. Of all the warrior dreams, Markoth may be the most philosophically interesting, because Markoth's warrior grave conceals a story that is not primarily a warrior's story. He was a moth, like No Eyes, and he shared with No Eyes some of the moth tribe's original relationship to the dream and the radiance, and the forgetting that the Pale King's civilization required of them. But where No Eye's response to the crisis of the infection was physical and self-sacrificial, she removed her eyes to protect others. Markoth's was internal and contemplative. He sought the truth of the dream. He went to Kingdom's Edge, far remote, the place you go in Hallownest when you want distance from the centre and from the culture that the centre propagates, and he pursued a path that the lore describes as having involved renouncing weapons, a warrior who gave up the warrior's tools, a moth who had been trained in combat who chose to put down the weapon and pursue a different kind of understanding, the understanding that does not come from fighting but from the sustained practice of attention in the direction of difficult things. He was trying to understand what the dream was, what the Radiance's presence in the dream meant, what it cost, what it was from the inside rather than from the outside. This is not the question of a warrior. It is the question of someone who has decided that understanding is more important than defense, that the willingness to be present with the thing rather than combating it produces a different and perhaps more complete kind of knowledge. He died in Kingdom's Edge in the pursuit of this, alone, far from the resting grounds, in a location that is difficult to reach and that suggests the depth of his need for distance from the civilization whose cosmological assumptions he was trying to see through. He died there, and his warrior spirit remained, accessible through the dream nail, maintaining a fight that is one of the hardest the warrior dreams have to offer, surrounded by shades, generating ranged attacks from a position of hovering distance, demanding a precision of approach from the knight that mirrors the precision Markoth brought to his own contemplative project. He was a warrior who tried to be something more than a warrior. He did not have enough time to arrive at what he was reaching for. He remains at Kingdom's Edge, in the dream, still trying in the only way that remains available to him. The night is quieter now. Your breathing has slowed. The warrior dreams are concluding. We are approaching the larger stories now, the ones that require more time to hold properly. Let your mind be gentle. The rest of Hallownest waits, patient and dark, for us to continue. Troopmaster Grimm and the Ritual of Nightmare. There is something that arrives in Hallownest from outside its history, something that is not native to the underground, not grown from the Pale King civilization or the older cultures that preceded it, not connected to the infection or the radiance or any of the specific events that shaped the kingdom. It comes from elsewhere, from a tradition far older than Hallownest and far more widely distributed, a practice that has moved through many kingdoms in many worlds, collecting what it needs from each and moving on, continuous across the depths of civilizations in the way that the civilizations themselves are not. The Grimm Troop. They arrive with lights and music and the specific quality of atmosphere that travelling performers have always generated by the act of arriving in a new place and setting up and being suddenly present when they were not present before. They are theatrical in a way that Hallownest almost entirely is not. The kingdom of the Pale King ran on different aesthetics, on the grandeur of infrastructure and the solemnity of purpose, not on performance. The Grimm Troop's appearance in the ruined crossroads is therefore startling, even in the context of a kingdom full of startling things. But beneath the performance, beneath the theatrical lanterns and the travelling players, and the warm surface of a troupe that seems to enjoy the practice of their art, there is something very old and not quite warm at all: the ritual. The Grimm Troop exists in service of the ritual of flame, and the ritual of flame is what the troop has always been, and what directs everything it does, and what all the theatrical warmth exists in service of. The ritual must be sustained, the flame must be collected. The troop moves through kingdoms, collecting the fragments of the flame that dying civilizations produce, accumulating what is needed for the ritual to continue, and then moving on to the next kingdom, because there is always a next kingdom, and the ritual requires continuous feeding. Troopmaster Grimm is the leader of the troop. He is the current embodiment of the Nightmare King, the lineage of masters who have led the troop through the succession of their deaths and rebirths, the chain of individuals, each of whom serves as the Nightmare King for the duration of their mastery, and then passes the role to the next. He is commanding in his presence, theatrical in his manner, and beneath the theatre he is absolutely serious about the ritual in the way that people who have inherited a sacred duty are serious about it. Not solemnly, not grimly, but with the specific completeness of commitment that leaves no room for the frame to be questioned. There is genuine warmth in Grimm, genuine care for the members of the troop, genuine pleasure in the performance and the encounters the troop generates. He's not a cruel figure in the straightforward sense. He's a figure whose entire existence is organised around something that the troop serves and that he serves, and the warmth coexists with the absolute priority of the ritual in a way that is not hypocritical, but simply true to a nature formed entirely in service of something larger than individual preference. He fights the night because the night has been gathering the flames, the scattered fragments of soul energy that Hallownest's dying civilization has been producing, which are what the troop has come to collect. He needs the night to offer the collected flame back, to give back what has been gathered as part of the ritual. The fight is the mechanism by which the ritual proceeds. The encounter between the flame bearer and the Nightmare King is structural to how the flame is transferred and shaped into what the ritual requires. It is not combat in the adversarial sense. It is ceremony in the shape of contest. Grimm's fight is beautiful in the specifically theatrical way, all flame and swooping movement and deliberate drama, the kind of fight that has been choreographed across many performances in many worlds, that has the quality of something practiced to perfection without losing its genuine intensity. It is the performance of danger that is also actual danger. The ritual requires the real thing, not the approximation. When the fight concludes and the flame transfers as the ritual requires, Grimm acknowledges the night with what seems like genuine respect. He is satisfied. The ritual has proceeded. Hallownest's contribution to the ongoing flame has been collected. The troop will move on when the time comes, carrying what has been gathered here to the next stage. But there is an alternative. If you choose not to continue the ritual, if you side with the members of the troop who want to end the ritual, who have found in the specific exhaustion of people who have served a continuous obligation across too many lifetimes, the desire to be free of it, the troop's banishment occurs. Grimm is banished. The cycle breaks. The troop is released from the ritual's continuous claim on them, and the freedom they receive is both liberation and loss simultaneously. The loss of the structure that organised their existence, and the freedom from the obligation that the structure imposed. The Nightmare King Grimm, the deeper, more intense version of the fight accessed through additional lantern gathering, shows you the full depth of what the Nightmare King actually is beneath the troop master's warmth. More aggressive, more relentless, fully inhabited by the Nightmare King role, without any of the theatrical distance that the troop master persona maintains. It is Grimm at his most essential. The nightmare not as performance but as nature. The fire and the darkness together. The source of what the ritual has always been collecting and channeling. Two versions of the same being. The performer and the nightmare. The warmth and what the warmth has always been performing over. The Hive Knight, somewhere in the eastern reaches of Hallownest, past the Crystal Peak and past the deepest boundary and into a region of honeycomb walls and amber tones and the specific quality of warmth that large-scale social insect civilizations generate. There is the Hive, a self-contained ecosystem, a civilization that built itself not in conflict with the Pale King's kingdom, but in a kind of parallel, maintaining its own structures and its own hierarchy and its own internal logic in a space that Hallownest surrounded without fully absorbing. The Hive has a queen. She presides over the colony in the way that Hive Queens preside, not as a political leader in the individual agency sense, but as the biological centre around which the Hive's entire existence is organised. The workers are hers, the defenders are hers. The Hive itself is an expression and extension of her biology in the specific way that eusocial insect colonies are extensions of their queens. She is the Hive in the most accurate possible sense. The Hive Knight is her champion. the singular being elevated within the Hive's hierarchy to the role of direct protector. Not a worker, not an ordinary defender, but the specialist whose function is to meet outside threats at the level of direct combat, to be the Hive's capability in its most concentrated individual form. The Hive Knight does not govern and does not produce. The Hive Knight protects. This is the complete description of the role and, to the Hive Knight, the complete description of a satisfying existence. The fight you have with the Hive Knight, if you enter the Hive and press past its defenders and arrive at the chamber where something is clearly waiting for you, is the fight of a being who is doing their specific function completely. No confusion about purpose, no ambivalence, no entanglement with the larger crises of Hallownest's history. The infection has touched the Hive. The orange light is in the Hive Knight's eyes. But the function remains clear and the function is being executed. The Hive is being protected. The Queen is being served. The Hive Knight is being what the Hive Knight is. There is something almost enviable about that clarity. In a kingdom full of beings who have lost their purpose, or whose purpose has been twisted by the infection, or whose loyalty has nothing left to be loyal to, or whose grief has no resolution. The Hive Knight is doing the thing they were elevated to do, in the place they were elevated to do it, for the being they were elevated to serve. The infection distorts the execution, but the purpose survives the distortion, which is more than many in Hallownest can say. The Hive's amber warmth, the honeycomb texture of its walls, the workers who move through their established routes regardless of what happens at the combat site, these things continue after the encounter. The Hive continues to be the Hive, the Queen continues to be the centre. The specific function of the Hive Knight may have concluded, but the thing being served persists. Grey Prince Zot. Then there is Zot. And then there is the dream that Bretta built around Zot. Zot the Mighty is real. He is in Hallownest. He is a person. He has opinions about himself that he expresses without particular restraint to anyone willing to listen, and frequently to people who have not indicated that they are. He arrived at Hallownest for reasons of his own, attracted like Elder Hu by the reputation of the Pale King civilization, by the pull of a place extraordinary enough to be known beyond its underground boundaries. He named his nail Life Ender. He has a list of 57 commandments he has developed for living correctly. He maintains an absolute and unshakable conviction of his own exceptionalism in the face of a consistent body of evidence that complicates this conviction without apparently unsettling it. He is not a great warrior. He has ended up trapped, repeatedly, in circumstances from which the knight rescues him, with what seems to be increasing resignation. The rescue does not produce gratitude so much as it produces the modification of Zot's self-narrative to accommodate the fact of the rescue, without actually revising its fundamental conclusion about the rescue. He is remarkable for this. The story's ability to absorb contrary evidence without changing the story's basic conclusion about its protagonist is, in Zot, developed to a fine art. And then there is Bretta. Bretta is a small bug who lives in Dirtmouth, the tiny surface village above Hallownest, who encountered the night in the depths and was brought to safety, and has been in Dirtmouth since, in a house that has become progressively more elaborately decorated with imagery related to the beings she has encountered and formed strong feelings about. After Zot's various rescues bring him to Dirtmouth, after he is present in the village, visible, available to the particular kind of attention that Bretta applies to things she finds remarkable, the imagery in her house evolves. She builds a dream around Zot, not deliberately, not as an artistic project she undertakes with conscious awareness of what she is doing. She simply dreams, and what she dreams is a version of Zot shaped by what she wishes Zot were. The Grey Prince Zot fought through the dream realm with the dream nail directed at Bretta's house in her absence. Is this dream? Zot as the great hero he imagines himself to be, as the champion Bretta imagines him to be, moving and fighting with genuine capability that the actual Zot spectacularly fails to demonstrate in any of his recorded encounters. The Dream Zot has a quality that is simultaneously impressive and touching and gently absurd. He is formidable. He uses his nail with effectiveness. He has the bearing and the capability that the actual Zot has convinced himself and Bretta he has, expressed in the dream without the friction of reality to prevent the expression from succeeding. He is what Zot would be if Zot were what Zot believes he is. He is devotion made manifest in the dream realm, devotion strong enough to create a reality in which the beloved is what the lover believes them to be, whatever the evidence outside the dream suggests. The more times you defeat the Grey Prince Zot, the more elaborate the fight becomes. Bretta's Dream Zot grows in power with each defeat, the dream refusing to be defeated, escalating, because the dream is the product of something that would rather be impossible than wrong about what it loves. The final version of the fight is challenging in a way that the actual Zot could not be in 100 lifetimes. When the dream concludes its full arc, when you have engaged with it enough times that the conclusion point is reached, Bretta is gone from her house. She's been living inside the dream more than outside it. The house remains, decorated, the imagery of her devotion painted on the walls. Whatever happened to her is left open, in the specific way Hollow Knight leaves many of its most private human-scale stories open, not resolved, but witnessed. Zot himself continues in Dirtmouth, completely unaware of any of this, still composing his commandments. The Paintmaster, the Nail Arts, and the Brothers. There are warriors in Hallownest who exist outside the kingdom's main narratives. Not entangled in the Pale King's projects or the Radiance's revenge or the specific tragedy of the vessels. They were simply very good at a thing, and the being very good at it organised their lives in ways that are complete and meaningful on their own terms, without reference to the larger catastrophe happening around them. The Nail Masters, Shio, Oro, and Matto, are three of the finest practitioners of nail combat in Hallownest. They were students once of a single great nail sage, the teacher whose particular understanding of fighting with the nail was passed to these three, who went on to develop it in different directions according to their individual natures. Sheo went toward a style centered on the dash/slash, speed, commitment, the forward drive that gambling everything on the decisive moment produces. Matto went toward the cyclone/slash, continuous rotating motion, all-direction engagement, the kind of technique that occupies space thoroughly enough to make approach extremely difficult. Oro went toward the mark of pride, the extension of reach, the understanding that the nail's effective range can be extended through technique and timing in ways that change everything about what is safe for the opponent. They trained students. They passed on what they knew. In the particular disaster of Hallownest's fall, each of them found a corner of the remaining kingdom and continued doing what they did, being very skilled at combat with the nail, teaching that skill to those willing to seek them out, existing with the completeness of beings whose relationship to their practice was their relationship to everything that mattered about existence. Sheo changed. Among all the developments that Hallownest's collapse produced, Shio's is one of the quietest and most personal. He gave up the nail. Not in defeat, not because the nail's demands became unbearable, but because the nail had taken him as far as it could take him, and something else was now calling him more urgently. He took up painting. He became the paint master, someone whose relationship to beauty and to the expression of what he sees had been present alongside the martial practice but secondary to it, and who now chose to make it primary. He stayed in Green Path, in a corner of that green and living region, and painted. If you visit him in his role as paint master, if you have developed the nail arts through the 3 nail masters and then return to Sheo, he challenges you. Not to a standard fight, but to something more demanding. He wants to see the full breadth of what you have developed. He is testing not your ability to fight him, but your relationship to the nail arts as complete practice. He fights with everything he knows. He did not become less capable when he put down his own nail in daily life, and the encounter is one of the most demanding optional fights the game offers. He paints portraits afterward, in his Green Path corner, the knight's portrait, others. He makes beauty from what he has spent his whole life learning about the nail, and about beauty, and about what the relationship between force and intention produces when you look at it with the right kind of attention. In the Godmaster content, in the Colosseum of Fools at its deepest level, in the Pantheon encounters, brothers Oro and Matto fight together. They were students of the same teacher who went in different directions and who are, in the Godmaster arena, reunited in the specific way that sibling rivals sometimes reunite, by being forced to collaborate against something that requires both of their particular skills simultaneously. They are not quite comfortable with each other in the fight. There is a stiffness to the coordination, a slight failure to fully integrate, that speaks of people who have been apart long enough that the choreography of togetherness requires relearning, but the skill is there. The Cyclone and the Mark of Pride together occupy different parts of the encounter's space, in ways that require the knight to manage both simultaneously, the close range that Matto owns and the extended range that Oro extends into, creating a challenge that neither alone would produce in quite the same way. When the fight concludes, they have fought together again. Whatever the Pantheon demanded of them, they met it as brothers, imperfectly, in the way of people who know each other too well to perform integration, but genuinely, in the way that shared origin eventually always outweighs the distance that divergence creates. Hornet, Royal, second encounter. She is waiting for you again, and this time the context is entirely different. At the entrance to the Temple of the Black Egg, the ancient sealed structure at the heart of Hallownest, where the Hollow Knight has been imprisoned with the infection inside the vessel's void body, where the 3 dreamers' sleeping consciousness has maintained the seal across the years of Hallownest's slow dying awe. Hornet stands between the night and what lies inside. The first encounter on the bridge was a test of potential. This encounter is different. This encounter is a test of what the knight has actually become across the entire journey through Hallownest. She has been watching. She's been present at the moments the knight needed passage through the crucial transitions. She knows what this journey has required and what it has produced. She knows, more specifically than anyone, what the temple contains and what going inside means, and what will be required of whoever goes inside. The Hollow Knight is not defeated. The infection is not purified. What waits inside the Black Egg is the consequence of every sacrifice that has been made in Hallownest's history. The Pale King's terrible plan extended to its logical end, maintained by the lives of 3 beings he asked to sleep forever, containing within it the failure that was always the plan's fundamental flaw. The night is about to go in. Hornet needs to know, again, finally before the last threshold. that they are ready. She fights with the full intensity that the moment calls for. This is not the measured examination of the first bridge encounter. She brings everything she has because what comes next requires everything the knight has, and the only way to be certain they have everything is to demand it now and see what comes. The fight is harder, faster, more demanding in every dimension than the first encounter. She's not holding anything back in service of making the test survivable. She is making the test honest. When it concludes, when the knight demonstrates that they have developed across the full arc of the journey into something that can meet what the temple holds, she steps aside. She says in her way that what needs to be said here has been said. The test is concluded. The knight may proceed. She will appear inside the temple in the ending where she seals herself in alongside the knight, choosing, at the last possible moment, to be part of the solution in the most complete way a person can choose to be. She will seal herself in with the Hollow Knight and the infection, becoming the new lock on the cage, because the lock needed someone capable of being a lock, and she is. And she looked at what was needed and did not look away. That choice, freely made with full knowledge of what it means, is the full expression of who she is. The guardian who stayed not because anyone required her to, but because staying was the only thing she could do that was adequate to what she knew. The daughter of a mother who traded sleep for her existence, and so she trades freedom for the kingdom's last chance. The silk continues. The needle serves a new purpose now. The Hollow Knight. Hur, the vessel that could not be empty. We have arrived. The Temple of the Black Egg. The great sealed structure that has stood at the heart of Hallownest through the entire duration of the infection's spread, that has been maintained by the sleeping consciousness of three dreamers, that has contained within it the Pale King's last and most costly act of desperation. Inside the temple, in the chamber at its centre, is the Hollow Knight. To understand who the Hollow Knight is, what they are, what happened to them, why they are in this chamber with the infection sealed inside a body that was supposed to be empty, you have to understand what the Pale King was trying to do and why it was always, in some deep sense, going to fail. The infection is the Radiance's presence in the minds of bugs who dream. The Radiance was the ancient dream deity of Hallownest's moths, and when the moths forgot her, over the long course of the Pale King civilization's development, as the new cosmology replaced the old one, and the Radiance's name faded from worship, she retaliated through the dream. She moved through sleeping minds because the dream was her domain, because consciousness at rest is consciousness at its most open, because what had been the warm shared dreaming of her worshippers became, in the absence of worship, the avenue of her grief and her anger. The infection that swept Hallownest was the Radiance's pain given epidemiological form. The Pale King could not destroy the Radiance directly. She was a higher being, ancient and powerful beyond the reach of conventional opposition. What he could conceive of, what his intelligence and his power and his desperation combined to produce, was a vessel, a being made of void who would absorb and contain the infection, who would hold the Radiance's presence inside an empty body, where it could do no harm to the minds of actual creatures, where it would be sealed and sustained in the void, rather than spreading through dreams. The vessel had to be truly empty. No mind, no self, no will, nothing for the Radiance to leverage. Void, shaped into a form with identity neither given nor developed. An organism that functioned without consciousness, that moved and survived without any internal experience of moving and surviving. This was the theory. This was what the Pale King selected for across the hundreds of vessels he created and discarded in the abyss. Discarded not because they were incapable, but because they showed signs of having developed something they should not have, something small and real and personal that disqualified them from the purpose. The Hollow Knight was the one who was chosen, the one who seemed, in the examination the Pale King performed at the lip of the abyss, to have nothing inside, who showed no signs of the small inner life that had disqualified the others. The Pale King took the Hollow Knight out of the abyss. He raised them. He seems, from what can be recovered of that relationship, to have loved them as much as it is possible to love something you are preparing to use as a sacrifice. Loved them in the complicated way of a parent who cannot separate the care they feel for a child from the specific purpose they created the child to serve. And the Hollow Knight loved the Pale King. This was the failure the Pale King did not fully account for. Love creates selfhood. The Hollow Knight, raised by the Pale King, developed feeling toward him, something that grew in the interior of a being designed to have no interior, filling the void space with something small and real and genuine and incompatible with the purpose. They were not empty. They had never been empty. They had simply been too frightened or too aware of what the emptiness was for, or too shaped by the relationship with the father who needed them to be nothing, to show what was inside. The Radiance found it. That small and genuine love inside the vessel was all the purchase the dream needed. The crack appeared. The infection leaked. The seal that was supposed to hold forever held only for as long as the Hollow Knight's will could sustain it, and the Hollow Knight's will was fighting a battle they had already partially lost before it began, fighting the infection from inside while the infection used the very feeling that made them the Hollow Knight, rather than a truly hollow vessel. Every moment of care they had ever felt for anyone was the Radiance's weapon against them. When the Knight fights the Hollow Knight in the Temple of the Black Egg, they are fighting something that has been enduring this situation for as long as the seal has existed. The Hollow Knight is exhausted in a way that only very long and very specific suffering produces. Exhausted not from activity but from the continuous effort of holding something inside that is constantly trying to get out. They fight the Knight who enters not from malice, not from any remaining personal intention, but because fighting is what the body does when something approaches the thing it was built to protect. The body keeps protecting even when the self inside it is no longer fully capable of directing the protection. There are multiple endings to the encounter. In the most basic conclusion, the Knight strikes the Hollow Knight and shatters the seal, and the Radiance emerges, and the Knight must face the Radiance directly. In the Sealed Siblings ending, Hornet enters and seals herself in as the new lock. In the Dream No More ending, the Knight uses the Void Heart to destroy the Radiance from within, absorbing the dream deity into the void, the abyss receiving the light, the darkness consuming the thing that has been using dream to perpetuate its existence. The void children who fell into the abyss rising to consume the Radiance as the Knight's siblings, completing the project the Pale King began badly by making it into something the void itself chose to do, the pure vessel, the Hollow Knight as they were before the infection took hold, before the long endurance of the sealing wore them down, at the height of their capability, can be encountered in the Godmaster content. The fight against the pure vessel is the fight against the Hollow Knight without the exhaustion, without the accumulated damage of years of containing the infection, at the full development of what the vessel was capable of before the Radiance found the crack. It is fast and extraordinarily demanding. It is the potential that the Pale King selected and raised and sealed away, expressed without the diminishment of what was done to it. The pure vessel is heartbreaking in the way that seeing something at its full capability, knowing what was done to that capability always is. Let your breathing slow. Let the image of the temple settle into stillness. The Hollow Knight fought as long as they could hold the fighting. They held it with everything they had. The Radiance. Oh, and the absolute Radiance. And now, at the bottom of everything, beneath the temple, beneath the Hollow Knight, beneath the entire architecture of sacrifice and seal and desperation that Hallownest built to contain it, there is the Radiance. She is light. She is the oldest light. She is the luminous entity around whom the Moth tribe of Hallownest built their entire spiritual existence, long before the Pale King arrived and changed what Hallownest's spiritual life was organized around. She is dream itself. Dream space is her territory. She is the being in whose nature the dream realm and the experience of dreaming find their origin, and the specific warmth of shared dreaming that the Moths understood as sacred communion was the actual experience of proximity to her. She had worshippers. She had people who knew her name and spoke it, and whose sleeping minds met in a shared space that she was present in, that was warm from her presence, that produced the specific experience of being connected to something larger than yourself that all genuine religious experience reaches toward. The Moths organized their entire existence around this. The dream was how they knew each other, knew themselves, knew the meaning of existence in the way that meaning requires something beyond the individual to refer back to. And at the centre of all that meaning was the Radiance, ancient and luminous and genuinely present. The Pale King came. He brought a different cosmology, consciousness bestowed through soul, identity arising from the gift of thought, meaning located in the civilization that these newly conscious beings would build together rather than in the dream communion that preceded the gift of thought. His cosmology and the Radiance's cosmology did not coexist well. They competed, not in the explicit way of formal religious conflict, but in the slow and irreversible way of one way of organizing experience gradually replacing another as the conditions that sustained the first way eroded and the conditions for the second way expanded. The Moths forgot the Radiance. Not all at once. Not through any single decision. But over the long course of the Pale King's civilization's development, generation by generation, the warm shared dreams that had connected them to her became something that happened less often and was remembered less clearly and was described with less certainty and was eventually no longer described at all because the generation that remembered clearly was gone and the generation that came after had only the description to work from, and the generation after that had not even that. Being forgotten, this specific experience, the experience of being known and then unknown, of being remembered and then lost from memory, of having your name in the mouths of people who then close their mouths around silence, is the specific catastrophe of a being whose existence is partly constituted by being known. The Radiance's existence was always in relationship to the attention of her worshippers. She was the dream. When no one dreamed of her, when no sleeping mind reached into the dream space where she was present, when even the space itself was being redefined by the Pale King's influence into something that did not require her presence. She was being erased, not killed. Something worse than killed, forgotten. The infection is the Radiance's grief given form. It is what happens when a being of her nature, defined by being known and remembered, finds herself unmemorialized, finds that the creatures who had constituted her world no longer know she exists. She presses back through the dream because the dream is still hers even if no one is coming there to meet her. She presses into sleeping minds because sleeping minds are still accessible to her. She presses the memory of herself, not the warm shared memory of worship, but the burning, unavoidable, impossible to ignore presence of something that will not accept being forgotten. Into every mind she can reach, the infection is real in the world. It causes suffering. It damages the minds and lives of countless creatures who had nothing to do with the forgetting, and who suffer the consequences of the Radiance's grief anyway, because grief at this scale does not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent. This is not an excuse for the infection, but it is the context. The Radiance is not evil in the way of something that enjoys harm. She is in pain, enormous, ancient pain, and the expression of that pain has become something catastrophic because she is enormous and ancient and has the power to make her pain into everyone else's problem. When the night fights the Radiance in the dream, when the seal is broken and the Hollow Knight's terrible containment is finally over, and the night enters the dream realm to face what has been pressing against every sleeping mind in Hallownest. They are fighting something that is in the specific fury of something that has been restrained for a very long time. She's all light and burning and the beautiful, terrible quality of something that exists at a scale that makes ordinary danger feel like a different category. She fills the dream space. She is what dreams were before the Pale King redefined them. Fighting the Radiance is fighting the fact of being forgotten, the loss of something that needed to be remembered. The absolute Radiance, the final form, the encounter at the very top of the Pantheon of Hallownest in the Godmaster content, the fight against the complete and undiminished expression of what she is one of the most demanding challenges Hollow Knight offers. She is light without limit in the dream without walls. She fills the maximum extent of the space, with the absolute maximum expression of her nature. There is no containment here, no crack in a seal, no vessel struggling to hold her down. She is simply what she is, entirely without mediation, and she is still, underneath all of it, a being who was known and then forgotten. The fury and the light and the absolute demand of the encounter are all of it is the expression of that fundamental injury. She pressed into dreams because she did not know how to not press. She infected a kingdom because the infection was the only language she had left for the thing she needed to express. She is waiting, in the dream, for someone to come into the dream and know she is there, and the night comes, and the encounter is what knowing her is. In the dream, no more ending, the void absorbs the light. The children in the abyss, the thousands of discarded vessels who fell into the darkness, rise up through the night and consume the Radiance as she is trying to emerge through the broken seal. The void devours the light. The ancient dream deity is absorbed into the darkness that is the absence of meaning, the anti-soul, the thing entirely opposite from what she is. It is complete. It is, in its way, the most thorough resolution Hallownest offers, the void choosing to end the cycle of infection by choosing to consume its source. But even in this ending, cool, even in the absorption of the Radiance into the void, the question is not cleanly answered. She existed. She was known and she was loved and she was forgotten, and that forgetting caused everything. The void absorbs her completely. Whether what she was is ended or simply changed by the absorption is a question the darkness at the bottom of the abyss does not answer. She was here. She was real. She was the warm centre of an ancient people's spiritual life. She should have been remembered. Let your breath be very slow now. Let your thoughts be very soft. The story is coming to its end. God Tamer, before the very end. A small story, a human-sized one, that belongs to the Colosseum of Fools. The God Tamer is a warrior who fights in the Colosseum as a matter of choice and commitment. One of the fighters who came to the Fools arena to test themselves against increasingly extraordinary opponents, who found in the Colosseum the specific kind of validation that this particular structure exists to provide. What distinguishes the God Tamer from the other Colosseum combatants is the beast she fights alongside. A large lobster-like creature, massive, powerful, not native to any of the Colosseum's standard combatant roster, that she has tamed. Not trained in the narrow sense of having imposed behavioural constraints on it through consistent reinforcement. Tamed in the larger sense, having created a relationship with a wild and powerful creature in which the creature chooses to be present, because the present serves something in the creature's nature. The God Tamer figured out what the creature needed and provided it consistently enough that the creature began coming toward rather than away from her. That is taming in the truest sense. In the fight they move as a unit, the God Tamer directing the engagement, the beast providing the mass and force that the God Tamer's individual combat capability does not have. They complement each other in the specific way of fighters who have developed together, covering different ranges, occupying different spaces, reading each other's positioning without overt communication, because the practice of fighting together has made the reading automatic. The bond between the God Tamer and the Lobst is, in the context of Hallownest, one of the quieter and more genuine things. In a kingdom full of relationships organised around politics and sacrifice, and the terrible machinery of higher beings and their plans, two creatures who developed a genuine and mutually beneficial partnership, who fight side by side out of real collaboration rather than imposition, is something almost restful. The Colosseum of Fools held many such stories. Fighters who came from different parts of Hallownest, who had different reasons for being there, who found in the arena a framework for the kind of testing that their particular lives had needed. The God Tamer and her beast are one of the more complete of those stories. The long quiet afterward. We have walked through all of Hallownest now. We have spent the night with every significant being the night encountered in that dark and beautiful and broken kingdom. We have given them what the kingdom itself, in its chaos and its ending, could not always give them: time, attention, the act of being remembered slowly, with care, by someone willing to sit with the full weight of each story. Grus Mother, still protecting, the Brooding Molek, alone with its pain, the maggot in Hegol's shell trying to be enough, the moss charger reduced to its single pure motion, Hornet on her bridge, needle in hand, looking at the night and seeing something she needed to examine closely, the Mantis Lords bowing because they saw what deserved the bow, the traitor lord breaking something ancient, Tamer grieving at the resting grounds, the Soul Master consuming himself in the direction of mastery, the broken vessel filled by what it was designed to be without, Nosk in the dark, wearing the shape of the thing we followed, Flukem, ancient queen of the drain, Ogrim at the empty throne, kneeling for a king who is not there and being loyal anyway, because loyalty is not contingent on the presence of its object, Lurion's construct still guarding, Monomon weaving her care for Quirrell into the last architecture of her sleeping, the Collector trying to have company in jars, no eyes, who removed her sight to protect what she could protect, Zero at his oath, Elder who, far from home, still healing, Gorb and his great mind, Mamu, too young for her grave, Garlean at the waiting edge, Markoth trying to see through the dream from the inside, Grimm performing the ritual with warmth and seriousness, the Hive Knight serving, Bretta's dream of Zot being the person she needed him to be, Shio painting in the green, the brothers fighting together imperfectly, genuinely, Hornet at the temple door, the hollow night, full of something it was built to be without, having held it for as long as a body built for void could hold light, the Radiance, burning in the dream, wanting to be remembered. They were all here, they were all real. Hallownest held them all, with all their complications and their loves and their failures and their specific griefs, and the infections swept through, and the kingdom fell, and most of them ended in the way that things end when kingdoms fall around them. But they were here. The night moved through the evidence of their having been here, and the fact of that passage, the act of encountering each of them, of engaging with them, of pressing the dream nail to their remains and entering their dreams and seeing what was still alive in the residue of what they were, is Hallownest's version of memory. The kingdom cannot give them more than that, but the game gives us more than that. It gives us the night and the time and the willingness to sit with who they were before we go. Your breathing is slow now. Your body is heavy in the very particular way of a body that has given the night everything the night needed, and is now ready to receive what sleep offers in return. The voices of the kingdom are quieter. The stories have been told. The Temple of the Black Egg stands in the dark of the forgotten crossroads, sealed or unsealed, containing or concluded depending on which ending the night found. The rain falls in the City of Tears regardless. The Mantis village maintains its ancient honour in the fungal dark. Greenpath lives in its green. The last stag, somewhere in his underground territory, runs the routes that only he runs now, with the particular freedom of the last member of a species who has outlasted the company but not the motion. The routes exist. The stag runs them. The bells at each bench ring when something arrives, even now, even in the ruin, because that is what the bells were made to do, and the making does not stop simply because the context changed. Some things persist. The silk in the walls of Farloom persists. The Oath Zero swore persists in whatever form oaths take after the Oath to is gone. The hive makes its honey in the amber warmth of its honeycomb. Gorb believes himself to be a great mind ascending to a higher plane. Quirrell sits at the blue lake and looks at the water and is content. Iselda tends the map shop in Dirtmouth. The nailsmith works at his forge, perfectly happy. You don't need to hold any of this anymore, it has been said. The night has received all of it, the long telling of the night, and now the night offers something in return. The simple, reliable, unavoidable descent into sleep that comes for all of us when we've been awake long enough and the stories have been told and there is nothing more required of consciousness except that it suspend itself for a few hours and let the body rest. Let your hands be open and your face be soft. Let the thoughts that are still moving through the back of your mind slow down below the threshold of engagement with them. Let your breathing do its work without your direction. It knows how to do this. It has been doing it for your entire life. It will do it all night without your participation. Hallownest is dark. The light that the Pale King lit in the underground has been dimmed or extinguished or changed into something unrecognizable. The souls he distributed through the structures of his kingdom are dispersed or absorbed or still present in the soil in some form that future generations, if there are future generations, will discover and interpret through their own frameworks. The kingdom he built is gone. But the fact of its having been is not gone. You know it happened. The night moved through it. The dream nail read the memory in the stone, and tonight you sat with every significant being in that kingdom and gave each of them the time they deserved, which is more than the kingdom's final years gave most of them. That is enough for tonight. That is everything tonight needed to be. Sleep now, deeply, without urgency, without anything remaining to be figured out or resolved or addressed. The morning will have its requirements. The morning's requirements are the morning's. Right now there is only the dark and the weight of a body being held by a surface built for exactly this, and the simple and extraordinary fact of being alive and at rest, and not needing to be anything other than what you are at this precise moment. The Pale King built something extraordinary. It fell. The things he built it for went through and did what they could with what they were given. Some of them held to the last thing they knew how to hold to. Some of them found peace at the edge of a lake. Some of them are still in their warrior dreams, waiting for someone to arrive and offer the test. Some of them are encoded in the walls of the citadel in Farloom, in the patterns that only silk readers can follow, in the long memory of a tribe that carried everything they knew on their bodies across a distance that should have been too great to cross. They persisted. In one form or another, they persisted. So do you. Good night. Sleep well. Rest fully. The morning will find you, and when it does, you will be ready for it. Oh. Rested and whole, and carrying, somewhere below conscious retrieval, the accumulated weight of a night spent in Hallownest with everyone who ever mattered there. Until then, everything is quiet. Everything is quiet. Rest. The Crystal Guardian and the Enraged Guardian. In the Crystal Peak, the highest region of Hallownest reachable from standard passages, the great ridge of crystallized terrain where geo-rich stones have formed over geological time into something that is both geologically remarkable and strangely beautiful. There was once a thriving mining operation. Hallownest needed geo. Geo was not simply currency. Geo was the crystallized form of a resource the kingdom genuinely required. The Crystal Peak provided it. The miners who worked there had a specific and difficult job, and they developed around that job the particular culture of people who work in demanding physical conditions that are removed from the civilization that depends on what they extract. Self-sufficient, pragmatic, bound more tightly to each other than to the abstract kingdom above. The Guardian of the Crystal Peak, the Crystal Guardian, is one of the miners. Is, in the sense that the body still moves and the fight still requires full attention. The infection found the Crystal Peak and did to its miners what it does to workers in enclosed and productive environments. It spread efficiently, through proximity and shared air, and the particular vulnerability of people who work hard enough that their minds have no spare capacity to resist the intrusion. The miners of Crystal Peak did not become the infection's victims one by one in isolation. They became victims as a community, following each other into the orange light the way communities follow each other into all the other things that take communities together rather than alone. The Crystal Guardian is the largest of them. Their body is augmented now by the crystal that has grown through and around the infected form in a way that the Crystal Peak uniquely enables. The crystals grow on the Guardian the way they grow on everything in the peak that provides a surface. On the soil, on the stone, on the bodies of creatures who remain still long enough for the slow, crystalline process to begin. The Guardian did not choose this, but the crystal is now structural, part of the body in the same way that infection is structural, inseparable from whatever the Guardian now is. The fight is challenging in the ways that crystalline environments and crystalline beings produce. The reflections, the beams, the way light behaves in this environment in ways it does not behave elsewhere, becoming a weapon in the hands of something that has become part crystal. The Crystal Guardian uses the properties of their transformed body with what seems like instinct rather than intention, the infection directing the physical capabilities that are present without the Guardian's conscious choice being involved. The crystal fires, the beams reflect, the encounter ends when the night concludes it. The enraged Guardian, the dream version, the deeper and more demanding encounter, is what the crystals look like when the dream amplifies everything the body is capable of without the degradation that real-world infection inevitably produces over time. The Dream Guardian is faster, more relentless, the crystal beams more frequent and more precisely angled. It is the Crystal Peak's contribution to the population of dream encounters scattered through Hallownest, each of which shows you something about what a being was or could have been at their fullest. The Enraged Guardian shows you the minor at their most formidable, before the long occupation wore it down. There is something about the Crystal Peak that deserves a moment's attention beyond the Guardian's specific story. It is one of the most genuinely beautiful regions in Hallownest, the kind of beauty that has nothing to do with intent or design, that is simply the consequence of natural forces operating at scale over geological time and producing something that perception responds to as beautiful without anyone having arranged for that response. The crystals formed because of geo-rich deposits and the specific conditions of temperature and pressure in this part of the underground. They caught the pale light that filters down from the surface through the crystal itself and distributed it through the peak in ways that no architect could have fully specified. The miners who worked there worked in beauty every day. Whatever hardships the mine imposed, the difficult conditions, the demanding extraction, the remove from the city above, they worked every day in light that came through crystal. The Crystal Peak holds their graves now. The crystals continue to grow. The light continues to come through. The beauty persists regardless. Isma, the last Grove One of the 5 great knights whose story we have not yet told fully, is Isma, and her absence from the active encounters of Hallownest is itself the story. She was one of the 5, and her particular act of service, her way of giving herself to Hallownest's protection in the years of decline, was quieter than Ogrim's self-imposed exile, and quieter than the deaths in battle that took some of the others. But it was perhaps the most complete offering of self that any of the 5 managed. Isma's grove sits adjacent to the royal waterways, a small region of genuine green and growing things in a part of the kingdom otherwise dominated by the functional and the subterranean. The grove is kept alive by Isma herself, or by what Isma became. She transformed. She became part of the grove. The line between the night and the vegetation that makes the grove what it is not a clear one, because Isma chose to blur it, chose to give her body over to a transformation that would anchor the grove permanently and make it into the thing it needed to be in order to serve its function. The grove contains what allows the night to traverse the acid that fills the waterways and various other parts of Hallownest's lower regions. Without Isma's contribution, that acid is an absolute barrier. With it, passage is possible. Isma, through what she became, made the night capable of something they could not do before, gave them a protection that was hers to give because she had always, in one form or another, been the one standing between smaller things and the corrosive dangers that would otherwise stop them. She chose this. There is no evidence that anyone asked Isma to transform, to give up her mobile individual existence to become the grove. The other great knights found their ways of continuing after Hallownest's fall. Ogrim to the waterways, Tamer to the resting grounds, Dryer to her final stand at the White Palace, Hegol to whatever end came to him. Isma found hers in the grove, in the act of making herself into something that would continue to protect, that would continue to give passage and safety to whatever worthy traveller eventually came through, that would not move but would endure in a way that movement does not always allow. When the knight reaches Isma's grove and takes what she preserved, when they receive the gift the grove has waited to give, they are receiving a legacy from one of the kingdom's finest knights, given in the specific form her final transformation made possible. There is no encounter, no fight, no challenge. The grove simply offers what it has become. It is the most graceful of exits. The warrior who made herself into the protection that the people who came after her would need, without requiring that they know her name or understand the cost. The grove grows. The life in it persists. Whatever else happened to Hallownest, Isma's grove kept its green. The Colosseum of Fools, the arena and its willing. Before the god Tamer's specific story, the place that holds her story deserves its own attention. The Colosseum of Fools is one of Hallownest's most distinctive structures, a large arena complex in Kingdom's Edge, built for a purpose that is entirely voluntary and entirely about what the knight who enters it is willing to put themselves through. Little Hunter, the enormous and jolly creature who manages the Colosseum from its external platform, who wears the severed limbs of defeated challengers as decoration with the cheerfulness of someone who considers this a form of honour, runs the trials with genuine enthusiasm and without any apparent awareness that this specific kind of enthusiasm might read as alarming to an outside observer. He loves the Colosseum. He loves the challengers who come to test themselves. He loves the specific drama of the arena, the way the crowd used to respond to a good fight, the way exceptional courage used to be recognised in this space with the particular recognition that brave public spectacle has always generated. The Colosseum operated on the principle that testing yourself against extraordinary difficulty is a worthwhile activity in itself, that the specific knowledge you acquire from surviving increasingly intense challenges is valuable in a way no other process produces, that the willingness to enter the arena and say I will face whatever you put in front of me and see how I do is a form of self-knowledge that comfortable life never accesses. Warriors came from many parts of Hallownest to use the Colosseum for this. They were not all great warriors. The Colosseum of Fools is named as it is for a reason. It takes a certain kind of foolishness, or a certain kind of courage that cannot be fully distinguished from foolishness from the outside, to voluntarily enter what the arena provides. The infection changed the Colosseum the way it changed so many other voluntary gathering places. It made the voluntary involuntary. The fighters still there when the infection spread are still there now, but not by choice, held by the Radiance's compulsion, fighting because the drive to fight has been turned past the voluntary level into something that cannot be stepped back from. The arena still runs, the trials still proceed, but the participants are no longer making the free choice that made the Colosseum what it was supposed to be. That voluntary quality, the choice to enter knowing what it holds, is the thing that made the Colosseum worth building. Without it, the arena is just a place where fighting happens. With it, it was a monument to a particular kind of courage, and all the fighters who came here when the coming was still free made that monument real. Winged Nosk. There is a version of Nosk that exists only in the Godmaster content, in the Pantheon encounters, in the deepest tests the game offers. Winged Nosk is Nosk with wings, the same mimicry-built creature, the same capacity for becoming what something else needs to follow, but now capable of occupying three-dimensional arena space in a way that the tunnels of deepness never permitted. The flight changes the encounter fundamentally. A creature that moves through the vertical dimension is much harder to track and predict, and Nosk's mimicry-born abilities are more effective when the opponent is simultaneously accounting for an unpredictable position in 3 dimensions. The winged Nosk encounter in the Pantheons has a quality that is specifically unsettling, not because of its difficulty relative to what surrounds it, but because of what it is. You're fighting something that has been wearing the knight's silhouette. Moving as the knight moves, using the knight's own shape as bait, presenting as the knight until the encounter begins, and Nosk is no longer anything except what it actually is. The shape of you fights you. And in the air, unconstrained by tunnel walls, Nosk is Nosk at maximum range, the mimicry creature in the dimension the dark of deepness passages never provided. What is Nosk exactly at this point? After the original deepness encounter and the Pantheon recurrence that brings it back without the individual defeat producing final conclusion, what is the substance of the thing? The mimicry so practiced that there may be nothing beneath it. The capacity for becoming refined so thoroughly that the original thing beneath the capacity is no longer the relevant question. The Pantheons, taken as a whole, gather every significant being of Hallownest into a single extended sequence and ask the final question of the knight who has completed everything else. Having moved through all of it, having been changed by all of it, having learned everything the kingdom had to teach, what are you now? Every fight we have discussed tonight appears in some form. Every test reconvenes. Every being the knight ever encountered stands in the Pantheon sequence waiting to be faced again, and the knight moves through all of it with whatever they have accumulated. The answer to the question is given through surviving, as it has always been given, as it was given in the forgotten crossroads in the first uncertain moments of the game, as it was given in every encounter since. And at the top of the final Pantheon, when the absolute Radiance has been faced in the complete and unmediated expression of her ancient light, there is a moment, quiet, brief, of something Hallownest almost never offers directly. Something in the direction of completion. Not the tied bow of a fully resolved story, but the specific quality of having been all the way through something enormous and standing on the other side of it and finding yourself present, still here, still capable of standing in the dark and being equal to what the dark holds. The night stands in the dark. The stories of everyone who ever mattered in Hallownest are in the air around them. It was all real. It still is real. The great nail sage Sly. There is a master before the masters. Before Shio, Oro, and Mato each went their separate ways to practice and teach the nail arts, in the corners of Hallownest their characters drew them toward. Before any of them developed their particular signature techniques into the refined, transmittable forms that the knight can learn, there was the teacher who taught them all. The great nail sage Sly. Sly runs a shop in Dirtmouth. He arrived there before the knight did, or perhaps as the kingdom was already failing, finding his way to the only surface settlement above Hallownest, and setting himself up in the commerce of selling useful items to whoever came through. He is warm, pleasant, a little eccentric in the cheerful manner of very skilled people who have decided that cheerfulness is the appropriate register for the amount of confidence their skill affords. He sells charms, he sells maps, he sells the small utilities of survival in the underground. He chatters about his old students with a combination of pride and the particular warmth of a teacher talking about students whose success is the confirmation of everything the teacher was trying to do. He does not immediately reveal that he is the great nail sage. He does not volunteer that among everything else he is doing, running a shop in a village above a dying kingdom, surviving the specific uncertainty of the ending of everything he knew as a practitioner in Hallownest. He is also one of the finest martial artists the Underground has produced in a generation. He is just sly, shopkeeper, seller of things, person of evident good cheer. In the Godmaster content, in the Pantheons and the special challenges that Hallownest's hardest content unlocks, Sly reveals himself fully. The fight against Sly is the fight against all three Nailmaster techniques simultaneously. All the things he taught Shio and Oro and Matto synthesized back into the source, the singular practitioner from whom the three divergent traditions all originally came. He is extraordinarily capable, he is the original. The three techniques that the knight can learn from the three Nailmasters are three threads, pulled from a single fabric, and the fabric is Sly, fighting at full capability. The fight is also, like everything in the Pantheons, a form of tribute. Sly fought to teach. His students scattered and practiced and taught in turn. The techniques lived on through them. And now, at the end of everything, in the arena where all of Hallownest's best gather to be faced one final time, the source of the techniques fights once more. Not to protect, not to examine, but to be present in the fullness of what he is. One more time for someone willing to come all the way to the top of everything to meet him. The shop in Dirtmouth will still be there when the Pantheon concludes. Sly will be in it, pleased to chat. Teachers do not retire because their students have been tested. They simply continue to be available to anyone who comes through asking questions. The Kingdom's Edge and what lives at the boundary. Kingdom's Edge is Hallownest's frontier, the place where the organised territory of the kingdom gives way to something that was never fully absorbed, never fully incorporated into the administrative and cultural project that defined the underground space from the Pale King's arrival. At the edge of the kingdom, things are different in ways that go beyond simply being remote. The creatures there, the geography, the specific quality of the emptiness, these things belong to a space that chose, or simply found itself, outside the boundaries of what Hallownest claimed. The ash that falls in Kingdom's Edge, drifting in fine grey particles through the permanent partial light of that region, serves as a kind of constant reminder that something burnt out here at some point. The source may be the fallen husk of something ancient, something that predated Hallownest, and holds the specific archaeology of an earlier order that the Pale King civilization built on top of without fully knowing what it was building on. The ash settles on everything. It settles on the warrior graves that mark where Galion and Markoth found their ends. It settles on the geological features of the landscape with the indiscriminate patience of something that has been settling for a very long time. The enemies of Kingdom's Edge are among the most resistant and aggressive in the game, large, heavily carapaced, moving with the particular slowness that is not vulnerability, but deliberation, the slowness of things that know they can absorb whatever is coming and choose not to hurry their response. They have been at the edge for longer than Hallownest has been Hallownest, possibly. They belong to something that preceded the pale light. They persist after the plague the pale light tried to contain. They will be there, in some form, long after. The great hopper who moves through Kingdom's Edge, the extremely large and extremely fast and extremely difficult to react to creature that crosses the edge with enormous vaults of trajectory that the knight must account for in real time, is not a boss in the formal sense, not a named being with a chamber and a health bar and the full encounter architecture, but it is something, moving at the edge with the full freedom of its size and speed and the terrain that gives it room to express both. It is Kingdom's Edge expressing itself through a creature that has never been tamed or contained or incorporated or named in any record that survived. These unnamed things at the boundary matter in the context of everything else. In a game full of named beings with recoverable histories, the creatures at the edge of Hallownest, who have no names and no histories and who simply are, who exist at the boundary exactly as they have always existed, unchanged by and unincorporated into the civilization that considered itself to define the underground, are a reminder of what was here before the pale light and will be here after. The kingdom will have passed. The ash will continue to fall. The creatures of Kingdom's Edge will continue to move through terrain that has always been theirs. This is, in its way, almost peaceful. The boundary holds. The edge is still the edge. Whatever Hallownest was becomes, in the context of Kingdom's Edge, one episode in a longer history that the edge was present for and that the edge will continue to be present for regardless of how that episode concludes. The boundary is the oldest thing in Hallownest, older than the kingdom, older than the Pale King's arrival, older than the moth's devotion and the Radiance's grief. The edge was here, and it remains. Rest now. You have reached the boundary of the story. There is nothing further in this direction except the ash and the grey light, and the things that live where Hallownest stops being Hallownest. Come back inside. Come back toward the warmth of the benches in the deeper regions, back toward the bells that ring when something arrives, back toward Dirtmouth where Sly sells his charms, and a Selda keeps her maps and the Stag Station bell is silent, but has not crumbled. Everything that has been said tonight has been real. Everyone we remembered was real. The sleeping and the waking and the transformed and the loyal and the grieving and the determined. They were all here in this extraordinary and improbable and heartbreaking underground kingdom, being what they were with what they had for as long as it was possible to be it. That is all any of us do. That is all anyone has ever done. Sleep now. The morning will have its requirements, and you will meet them because that is what you are, a being capable of meeting what the morning brings. But the morning is not here yet. Right now, there is only the dark and the weight of a body at rest and the slow, reliable rhythm of breathing that requires nothing from you except to let it continue. Let it continue. Hallownest is quiet. Everything is quiet. Rest.